Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, one and all, yet another episode of WhickTV. Oh, gang, we have an explosive topic for you today. We're going to be talking about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. During World War II, at the end of it, in order to force the Japanese surrender, the American military dropped 2 nuclear warheads on Japanese cities, namely Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Since then, we have been discussing, as a nation and as a culture, whether or not this was justified. Was this something that was a necessary evil, or was it simply, was it avoidable ultimately? Could we have not done this and achieved the same results? Was it worth the price? We have gathered a team to discuss this very topic. So first of all, I want to thank you, all of you, for showing up. And yeah, we'll get into it. Go. We're going to start with 𝕵𝖎. What you got for us, buddy?
Howdy, y'all. My name is 𝕵𝖎. You can check me out at twitch.tv/𝕵𝖎, kick.com/𝕵𝖎, and twitter.com/𝕵𝖎. I think the important question when we talk about moral conduct during war is not necessarily was it, with the benefit of hindsight, worth it? Did it actually save more lives? But did the actors in the moment do the best they could, reasonably could be expected, to minimize collateral damage? And I think when it comes to the question of the nuclear weapons and their deployment in Japan, I think the answer to that is a resounding yes. That based on all the information the United States had available at the time, that they genuinely believed and had good basis of believing this, that using the nukes would save more lives than it would cost.
Okay, thank you for being here, 𝕵𝖎. We'll get into it, I am sure. Let's... Oh, Prime, whoa. Hi.
Hi.
You're super loud. You're super loud.
Oh my god. Is it gain?
Yeah, Mike, I think.
Yeah, the gain is like through the roof.
Okay, you think I'm using the wrong mic. Alright.
Okay. We're gonna give him a second. Okay. But we're gonna go to LSP, a last minute edition. So thank you for coming through.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, what you got for us?
Everything 𝕵𝖎 just said is 100% wrong. So I guess, like, whatever he said, just assume my position is the opposite. And we'll get into it when we get into it.
Okay, we'll get into it when we get into it. Strong opening stance. We'll see how it plays out for him. Next up, first time guest on my show, Old Man Laundry. Please, what you got for us?
Wick, thank you for having me on. I'm Old Man Laundry. I'm a former elected official. I also have over a decade of experience in IRL politics. And
I'm sorry, hold on. Prime, you're hot mic in with the static. Okay, he's fixing it. Okay, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but just, yeah, go ahead.
Damn, busting my balls already. Okay. Yeah, about a year ago, I started making political content on YouTube, so you can check that out. And when I'm able, I also enjoy to make art. But as for this debate, you'll hear a lot of perspectives, but I'm not here with the intent to disregard the incredible loss of life that these nuclear weapons brought. And I'm not here to champion the use of atomic weaponry. That said, I will be making the case that in the context of World War II, the use of nuclear weapons was generally justified. So I look forward to the debate.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing your take. We'll see how it goes. Next up, another first-time guest on my show, PBP, Principles Before Politics. What you got for us, Kitty?
I would also like to thank you for having me on. Honor to be here with everybody else on the panel. No special plug. I'm just someone who finds this stuff interesting and have a job that is government adjacent, hence the cat. But the argument that I'm essentially going to be putting forward tonight is that the effort by the United States government to assess what would or wouldn't be necessary to end the war and save the most amount of lives was done soberly and in good faith. That a lot of the critiques of dropping the bombs use an awful lot of hindsight bias or just a misunderstanding of what these weapons actually were. And that the escalation in Japanese tactics was every indicator that something drastic needed to be done, or they were going to fight in desperate ways to the last man, so to speak. So that's essentially my take.
Okay, we'll get into it, I'm sure, during the show. Thanks for being here, Kitty. Next up, hopefully his audio is working. 𝕵𝖎𝖙. If not, we'll just skip him and go to 𝕬𝐻ris while he fixes it. Oh, we can't hear you at all now. Okay, while he's messing with that, nope, still can't hear you. Okay, 𝕬𝐻ris, go ahead.
All right. Yeah, so I think that some things I expected to come up have already come up. My stance is that while the development of the atomic bomb and the choice to use it is understandable, I think it's ultimately unjustified. And I think that most attempts to justify it take the form of some claims that we've already heard that I don't think actually get to the heart of some of the moral issues at play. So, for instance, the idea that it saved more lives than it cost, we can sort of nuance that and we can unpack this. So the estimates that they had at the time that we're working with now, even if that's correct, I'm not certain that it is. I'm not certain that that justifies the use of the bomb. So I want to unpack that as well. Things like, Japan committed grave atrocities or would have fought to the last man. Again, not certain that that justifies targeting ultimately non-combatants or people who were at the time non-combatants. Germany would have used the bomb or developed the bomb had we not. Again, I'm not certain that that is relevant to the actual choice to use it. And then I'm sure we'll talk about how firebombings killed more people than the atomic bombs did, and those were probably bad too. So I think what I want to start off with, though, is maybe as we wait for Prime to fix his mic, is that I think there are some specific things that ought to prejudice us against the use of the bomb that we have to work really hard to overcome. One of them is that I think definitionally you can't avoid that it was an act of terror. So this is like Henry Stimson's defense of it in his Harper's Magazine article from 1947. He says it was used as a psychological weapon specifically. And so he says specifically we could have killed more people with firebombings if killing people was the point. That wasn't the point. It was striking fear. And it was an admitted targeting of civilians. Stimson also says they targeted areas with standing structures, places that had not been targeted by firebombing because they were militarily relatively insignificant. So targeting of civilians, an act of terror, I think should prejudice against us. That's gonna you got to do a lot of work to convince me that that's okay.
We'll get into it. We're gonna try with 𝕵𝖎𝖙 one more time. 𝕵𝖎𝖙, what you got?
You'll try me as many times as it takes.
True. Okay, it's much better. It's not perfect, but it's better.
Okay, is it gainy? Still gainy?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, well, I'd turn the gain all the way down, so I don't know. But anyway, I am happy to be on the side of Eucharist here. Yeah, so I didn't get to hear the opening statements of the pro slaughter side, but well, you're wrong. Reviewing all of this, the history is, I wouldn't want to say clear because these things are always so complicated that it's not clear. That most people, I don't blame most people for thinking this. I thought the same thing, that it was a matter of saving more lives, right? But it's simply not the case. Actually looking into this very complicated history with a lot of different principal actors with different motivations, right? And putting that all together, doing that is very hard. So it makes it difficult for people to engage with this. But at the end of the day, no, we did not have to drop those bombs. The thing that made Japan surrender was one, the fact that it had already lost militarily, and they understood that. And two, the Russians, who they were hoping to help intercede politically, declared war on them. And they were like, oh shit, we don't have any friends. And so I guess we'll give up. But the loss of life was absolutely not the thing that did that. Not when you're dealing with a totalitarian regime. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here, all of you. And with that, again, we'll get into it. If you have trouble getting in, or if you feel like you're being talked over, let me see your hand. And if you're liking the content as we go, if you super chat, I'll try to ask the questions to the panelists. So if you have some issues with what's being said and you're in the audience there and you want to participate, that's how you do it. So thank you for the gift subs, by the way, and we'll get into it. So go ahead, floor's open. What you guys
Yeah,
got?
I wanted to address a question that you, Chris, brought up that I thought was rather interesting. The question of it was an act of terror is used as a psychological weapon. I don't know if this is actually something that I really care about. I think that I would much rather have someone terrified or psychologically distraught than resort to killing them. So I think like the fundamental question of like, oh, was it a psychological weapon versus was it a non-psychological weapon that killed people? I think the real thing we're getting at is it justified to target civilians, whether you're targeting them psychologically or whether you're targeting them non-psychologically. I think like
Sure,
that's
yes.
the core.
It's the combination of like there's competing definitions of terrorism, but the one that I really like says that what makes it different than standard military actions is the innocence of the target and the intent to strike them despite or because of their innocence. And so I think it is, and so maybe you're right, maybe that's morally irrelevant, but I think for most of us we want to say, ooh, that at least gives us pause. I've got to find a reason to say, okay, it was fine to attack those civilians in this instance. Yeah.
That's totally fair. I do think, I actually do think there's a lot of distasteful dialogue from people on my side, who I nonetheless do think the bombings were justified, but I don't think it's appropriate to necessarily speak with a bit of callousness, and I think there are some really bad arguments that come from there. I definitely think there's people that go too far. But I think the fundamental question is not a question of nuclear weapons, but a question of strategic bombing. Do we think it is okay to bomb cities where we know there's going to be collateral damage, we know there's going to be civilians, if there are legitimate military targets within the cities? I think, like, for example, the London Blitz or the bombing of Dresden, or as you mentioned, the Tokyo fire bombings. These are other examples that I think morally, they don't have, the flash of us talking about them because of the nuclear aspect, but I think they are just as morally compromised as this. I think you very clearly have to put either all of them in one bucket or all of them in the other.
I'm gonna take the very controversial stance that we should not have bombed Dresden. Yes.
Yeah, they're both morally compromised. Although I might mention, like, to suss out the moral justifiability of a strategic bombing, a civilian population, you have to measure intent and you have to measure proportionality. Do you intend to strike a military target? If so, are you using the proportional amount of force to strike that military target? What makes the firebombing of Tokyo, the bombing of Dresden, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki distinct is we try to maximize damage. It made us, in fact, I agree 100% with you, Chris. It puts us in the vein of a terrorist because we deliberately targeted civilian populations and we tried to maximize the damage against that civilians.
If I may, I'd like to put a little bit of nuance into that, because to say that the U.S. intention was to maximize the damage, with respect to the bomb itself, yes, the intention was to make the largest single weapon possible to demonstrate a massive show of force that says, hey, what we did to you in Tokyo with a 430 fighter air force, we just did to you with one bomb. That's fair, but I don't think it's very fair to say that the intention with Hiroshima was to maximize damage, and I don't think it's fair to say that with respect to Nagasaki either. And I'm happy to get into both of those. That specifically with Hiroshima, in distinction to Nagasaki, Nagasaki was a backup target. That there was a backup plan that literally included dropping the bomb in the Pacific Ocean because they couldn't deliver it as intended.
Yeah, let me. Can
Nagasaki,
I
I think, goes into it.
Well, let him finish. No, finish your point, and then you can dig into it if you'd like.
I'll try to be brief. Just that I think Nagasaki we have to put into a separate category with, again, a little bit more nuance because it was a backup target and there's some complicating factors there. But that with Hiroshima in particular, it was chosen very deliberately and very specifically based on a whole series of different properties that the government was looking for on different levels, militarily, politically. This was something that came up in the Oppenheimer discourse, that somebody had made a dipshit tweet about, oh, they only didn't bomb Kyoto because they vacationed there. Well, no, Truman was on record saying that he specifically did not want to hit Kyoto because it was the old capital and it wasn't particularly militarily valuable. It would have been a symbolic victory, not a military victory. So the targeting of Hiroshima had to do with the fact that there was a large military installation there. Now, other targets had been prioritized for firebombing because they were like, air bases and things like that. Hiroshima was a logistics base, so that's a completely different kind of target, but that doesn't make it less militarily valuable. And it's also an important port city that they were moving troops and munitions and supplies and whatnot through Hiroshima. Additionally, it was surrounded by a series of hills that they were noted. This was noted in the internal discussion of the site selection team, that was expected to concentrate and limit the blast, that it would maximize the damage of the bomb there, but that it would limit damage to any surrounding areas. and that there were water sources in addition to the ocean. There were rivers that limited the potential for there to be a massive firestorm in the result of the bomb.
Sure.
That there
Yeah.
were specific considerations taken to try to limit some of these factors.
Sure. And then the bomb dropped on a hospital. All right. But like I think this is like pointless. Before I get into why it's pointless, it's nice to apparently see Flo Trace's face after 3 years of him not doing that. Okay, all right, but your handsome.
Nice to see you too, thank you.
But anyway, yeah. So like, none of this actually matters. Right? Like it actually doesn't matter whether Hiroshima had industrial, military, logistics capabilities. None of that matters because the Japanese Security Council was looking to surrender. The point was, hey, we gotta surrender, and we gotta do it our way, right? And what's our way? Well, it depends. One half of the council says that, well, we have to have a whole list of demands met. And they're the more militaristic side. And the other side was like, well, we just gotta keep the emperor on the throne. That's the only thing that really matters. It was just how to surrender. And the Americans knew that. They knew that they had already broken the Japanese messaging codes, Telegram codes, I don't know, whatever. The Twitter password. They broke the Twitter password, and they were seeing messages going back and forth between their diplomats. And they knew exactly what was happening. So the only reason why we wanted to use those bombs was to make sure that it was an unconditional surrender. But it ended up being sort of conditional any which way. So again, the bombs are pointless.
I don't think you can look at the difference. Sorry, Rick, you're going to go ahead.
No, I wanted to make sure LSP got his points in as well, and then I want to give Landre some spaces. Here.
It's noticeable that the bomb's intent was to maximize damage. If Hiroshima were this important a military target, it would have been targeted by conventional bombings long before it was ever targeted by nuke. It really wasn't. Hiroshima was preserved as a city to test the nuke on. More than that, like there's something kind of gross about the idea that 220,000 lives are expendable for the actions of their government when we know that they're innocent, that we're deliberately trying to maximize the damage and terror that's done to them. There's this strategic bombing survey. Yeah, the 1946 strategic bombing survey says like Japan was already on their way to surrender, and they would have surrendered by November with just conventional bombing anyway. The nukes didn't accomplish anything except kill 220,000 innocent people. Who didn't have to die. As Prime pointed out, we already knew they were looking to surrender as early as July.
You are aware that civilians die in conventional firebombing too, right?
Yeah, I'm just assuming. Not all bombing needs to be firebombing, right? There are other bombs that you can use, right? And you can use smaller ordnances for military targets.
Go.
I mean, sorry, go for it.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, on the question of we knew they were already going to surrender, there's a huge difference between the conditional and unconditional surrender. For example, one of the big conditions that a lot of, and I don't want to say all of the people within the Imperial Japanese government thought this, but a very strong position within the Imperial Japanese government was that one of the conditions of surrender was keeping many of their overseas territories, that maintaining them as imperial subjects or as colonies, and there's a lot of really brutal stuff there. So I think you have to factor that calculus in. The difference between Japan surrendering,
regime, yes, got it.
Yeah. The difference between Japan maintaining, getting a conditional surrender versus unconditional surrender. There's a lot of innocent lives that would have been killed or ruined if they were allowed to have a conditional surrender. So I don't think you can say that they were.
There was no chance that was going to happen any which way. Continue.
Well, I think there absolutely is a war. I don't think you can say that at the time the Allies thought there was impossible that Japan would grind out a very long war to the bitter end, just as Nazi Germany just had done, and refusing to ever give up their territories.
We already know they weren't going to do that because we knew they were going to try to surrender.
No,
they literally did not have the capabilities to do so. They were already military defeated. They were done. Their warships were expended. They really didn't have the fuel to use their warships anymore, and some of them were used as stationary platforms. They didn't have the ability to prosecute a war. So to say that there would be any reality in which Imperial Japan, would have been able to keep its imperial territories is a fantasy.
Well, no, it's not. It's not a question of is that a fantasy. It's a question of in order to make that reality not true, in order to force Japan just by virtue of on gunpoint to the point where they were going to unconditionally surrender and not keep their territories. That process could have been very bloody. That they absolutely could have held out until the very bitter end. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Are you of the position that the 2 nukes were necessary to get Japan to surrender?
I don't know if they were necessary. I think it is reasonable that the Allies thought that it would be a net good effect in order to force an unconditional surrender.
Okay, but I'm asking like your opinion, not what the Allies thought. Like, if you were President Flowtrace, would you have dropped the bombs?
If I was President Flowtrace, I don't know. Currently, knowing what I know now, probably not. But I don't think it's fair to
$10
judge the past actions.
Just
with
real
the knowledge
quick,
we have now.
$10 from Arabic account. I can't read that. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were left unscathed for the sole purpose they would be hit by the nuclear bomb. We could have bombed non-civilian areas to send the message. And that's my question for the pro side. I don't know what happened to 𝕾𝖍𝖎.
I could switch sides
back.
if you guys want.
No, it's fine.
Like crime.
No, you're fine. No, we're good where we are. Hopefully 𝕾𝖍𝖎 comes back. Hopefully it was just a technical issue. I don't think I did anything wrong to offend him. But that's a question for the pro side here. Why Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Why not a non-civilian target in general? Like, why did it have? Why was it justified to bomb these cities? I understand that there might have been military targets within those cities. Yeah,
I think one thing that definitely needs to be said here is we need to make sure that we're not 2023 brained here. We're talking about dumb bombs, right? We're not talking about guided missiles and shit. We're talking about people who barely have radar. And in many cases, some of these cities, this was one of the issues and one of the reasons that Nagasaki wound up getting chosen as the backup target that day was because they couldn't get a radar lock on anything. They couldn't find their target. So it's pretty demanding in a historically revisionist way to say that these bombs were supposed to be ultra accurate. Like, yes, it went off over a hospital, but the aim was to hit a bridge. And the bomb was so big it was going to level half the city anyway. And again, that's kind of the point. That
right. So I don't condemn them for failing to be accurate. I condemn them for using it at all. Right? Like
yeah, that's exactly the case.
So because we knew exactly how indiscriminate it was, I think that's part of the reason why I think you can have serious moral challenges about firebombing as well, because it's similarly indiscriminate, less so than the nukes were. But like, yeah, we knew exactly how indiscriminate it was going to be, and we used it sort of anyway. I mean, I think you have a good, like, I want to be as fair as possible. I can't see your guys' names because Discord is doing that weird thing where it just has ellipses afterwards, but principles before politics. You're right that there was, like, Stimson says this again in his Harper's article, the committee on, like, selecting targets made sure that the targets they chose were dual targets, that they both had some sort of military significance and had lots of standing small structures. And so there weren't a ton of those because basically, as far as I read it, maybe I'm being too cynical, but as far as I read it, the military significance part was sort of a backdoor justification. So you could say, unlike Kyoto, like, no, there was a real reason we bombed this because they had military significance. But what we really wanted to do was show all the, the houses turning into matchsticks. Like, that was the real goal. As far as, like, the status of their surrender, again, I'm not sure that that's, like, the most morally relevant thing. I think, like, none of us are professional historians here, but as far as I'm aware, there's, like, competing narratives about really how close Japan was, right? So you have there was a great thread that went viral again after the Oppenheimer stuff. There's a 1999 book by Richard Frank called Downfall, where he uses Japanese archives to argue that they weren't going to surrender, that the emperor wasn't able to take this divided cabinet and get them.
Yeah, just real quick. First of all, $5 from 𝕍𝖎. After 6 years of war, millions of lives lost, and an empire so brutal, even the Germans were scared. I like the argument is use different bombs. I will say that after the second bomb, after Nagasaki, the emperor tried to surrender, and his war council literally broke in to try to stop him. Like, he had to fight off his own people who tried to stop him.
It was a junior officer's coup, but it's not the war council. In fact,
they
couldn't get the war council to go along, so they all committed suicide.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly.
Yeah, but that's a clear indicator of where the military viewpoint was at the time. But before we pivot to the question of surrender, because I think there's a lot to talk about there, I wanted to touch back on the comment about producing damage. That, I mean, again, we're talking about a situation where pretty much any kind of bombing attempt, there is a strong likelihood of accidentally hitting civilians. It's the nature of war at that time. And the whole purpose of this was to say, again, what we could do to you with an entire Air Force, we did to you with one bomb. This is an indication that you should end this war. And the targeting of Hiroshima in particular, again, we're talking about the concept of, untouched and small buildings and all this stuff. Part of the goal here was to measure and understand what this weapon could do. We had exactly 4 bombs at the end of the Manhattan Project when we were deploying them in the end phase of the war. One of them had been detonated at Los Alamos, but that was a practical test because these things were so new and so different from one another, we didn't even know if we could get the mechanism to fire. And that was executed under perfect conditions, not dropping it over an actual target. We didn't really know what this thing was capable of, and the whole purpose of hitting something that hadn't been hit previously, the whole purpose of holding specific targets in reserve that were militarily valuable, that weren't purposeless, was to be able to measure it, to know what it did, so that we would know exactly what kind of
we
horror
measured it
was
in
done.
human fucking lives. Amazing,
right.
right? And we did know what it did because we had the Trinity test previously. It was proven that the bombs work. Right, so we already had that. We didn't need to fire, and we really built like towns. Right, we built towns to incinerate them, just for that, nuke towns. So we didn't need to do that. We didn't need to bomb it on a civilian or use it on a civilian population. And once again, I won't stop mentioning this. All this talk is pointless because the Japanese were going to surrender. And once again, they had no ability to hold on to their imperial gains because they had no ability to prosecute the war. They were done. Dead in the water. The only thing that they were arguing about is like, how badly is this going to be for us? That's it. That's it, right? So let's not bullshit about this, right? Let's focus on the fact that America knew the situation, the military situation. They were reading the fucking cables as they were going across, and they decided to ignore that. They just went along with the plan, and that's a problem.
We need to. It's not. Sorry, go ahead, Laundry.
Yeah, Laundry, go ahead.
The one thing that I've been wanting to say for quite some time is that with respect to, I mean, we've talked already a little bit about how these
Thank you for the raid,
two
Corey.
cities were viable military targets, and it's obvious, I think everybody here agrees, that there is a level of indiscriminate harm done by nuclear weapons, firebombing, and other weapons of war that were being used at that time. And all of the innocent civilians that were killed, that's worth taking into consideration, obviously. And any innocent civilian that dies is a tragedy. That said, acting like every person who died in these 2 nuclear events were like innocent civilians and not in any way.
I was really hoping you wouldn't say that. Holy fuck! But continue.
You gotta let him finish. He's not talked this whole time. He's not talked this whole time.
Barbarity. Go ahead, please. Sorry.
Finish, Laundry.
Yeah, I guess there are probably people in the world who believe that wars can be waged with, riding in on unicorns and, rainbows and shit. But that the shitty part about war is that it's really shitty and it is barbaric and it's awful. And I cut my political teeth in the anti-war movement in 2005. So this is not a promotion of war. It is an acknowledgement of things that happen during wars.
Okay, before Prime cuts into him, I want to ask, do you sincerely think our position is that war should be waged with no collateral damage?
That sounds like that might be one of the panelists' view.
No, I don't think it's any of our view. I think we're perfectly fine with war being waged, understanding collateral damage is inevitability. We just disagree with maximizing collateral damage deliberately. That's our position.
Right. So, I mean, I'm probably more on an extreme, I suppose, but I do think that
fuck you! God damn it! Just contradict me. Just son of a bitch.
No, you're right. Right. Collateral damage is inevitable, but there are ways that we maximize collateral damage, both with the firebombings and with the nukes, and I think both are compromised, right? In specific applications like Dresden, which is not a super militarily viable target, and in specific applications like both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which is, again, I'm just going to hold the line on that. Like, the reason we hadn't been bombing them is because, yes, we could sort of justify that they were military targets, but not really. They weren't really that important. The point was, again, the psychological terror that it caused with this backdoor justification. No, there really was a good reason. Don't worry. It's not like Kyoto, right?
Personally, I don't. Or sorry, Prime, are you gonna go off?
I absolutely will. Just so you know, there's a
I'm going after
banging
Brad.
in the background, and I can't help that. That's like the other house. So I do apologize for that. Pretend it's me banging
don't
my
hear
head
it.
against the table every time that any of the other people on the other side speak. So here's a problem. Once again, the war was over, right? So I get it. People
But it
die in
literally
war.
wasn't.
Yeah, when we are engaging in a conflict that
Prime,
people indeed die. Hold on, I'm okay. Like
sorry?
people will die, right? Yes, they didn't sign the surrender, but they were trying to surrender. They understood that
Some of them
the
were.
war was over. All
The
of them.
emperor was
No,
already looking for surrender.
literally
The war was over.
all of them. All of
They
them
m-
understood that there would be a surrender, that they could not prosecute this war anymore. That part's important. Please, audience, do not forget that part. Yes, there were some who wanted more out of a surrender, right? They wanted a very favorable conditional surrender, but they were going to surrender because they just couldn't fight
Someday,
anymore.
maybe.
So in any case, yes, someday, and that day came when the Russians declared war on Japan. That's when they realized, this part's important, that's when they realized that they couldn't get any help. They had no one in the international stage who's going to back them up for negotiations. Then they're like, oh shit, like the plan that we were going for, which was a conditional surrender, is not going to work because the Russians are now invading us, and we can't stop them because we can't prosecute a war here. That part's very important, so I'll keep mentioning that.
Launder, can I ask, if they didn't surrender after a second atomic bomb, would you favor dropping a third?
In hindsight, I don't know.
But it made them
I mean, I
surrender,
think
right?
Say that again.
But if it made them surrender, right, it would be okay.
Wait, can I
that was
ask?
the position of Truman, as far as I understand.
Can I ask
And
you,
he
What's your
said
position?
after
Just
the
real quick.
first
Yeah,
and the second,
Yeah, you can
we'll
ask
Just-
use
anyway.
as many as necessary.
Yeah, just real quick,
I'm not saying
LSP.
that
Had
that's
they not surrendered, and this is for Prime, LSP, Eucharist, had the Imperial Japan not surrendered after the second bomb, and they didn't right away, it took them a week. Let's be clear, right?
They took their sweet time, yeah.
Yeah. If they had not surrendered, what would you suggest us to do, or the Allies to do?
But before you answer that question,
Motherfucker!
let Roger answer your question first. Let me get that
Oh,
out.
okay.
And
Yeah,
then I'll
sure.
answer your question, Wick. I
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
will. But
Well,
Roger,
I wanted to answer that question. Well, whatever.
you'll get a chance in a second. Roger, please. I want to hear what you have to say.
About what?
His original
If they
question.
don't surrender after the second nuke, should a
I guess
third
there
be
was
dropped?
probably some conversation happening over my answer, but I said at this point I'd have to think about it more personally. But I am saying that the historic reality was that it was Truman's position that
Okay, just let me try. Let me
Yeah, I
stop.
guess I don't
Let me
know.
try. Landre,
I don't know what the point is,
you
but-
have you are king of America. It's
President
your choice,
Launder.
right? Your choice.
I like
You
how my
were
questions keep getting repurposed.
General Sensei, you were General Sensei King Landre. You are the one that decides. 2 bombs have done it. They're not surrendering. There's no sign they're surrendering. You're pretty sure they're going to keep going indefinitely. Do you drop a third?
Well, God help you all if I became president. That would not be something I would wish upon anybody. That would not be fun. I can
So would
only
you
put
drop a
myself
third?
in the position of if I were Truman, who said
Sure.
he will, would you instead of turning your head into some kind of like bobblehead or
Yeah.
doing
Answer
the
the fucking
theatrical
question.
hand
I
on the
won't do
forehead?
that when you answer the
Can you
question.
just let me
Stop
answer
being
the
fucking
question?
slippery.
Just
Let me
chill,
answer
chill,
the
Stop.
question.
Give
Answer
him
the
a
question.
chance to answer.
How
Give him
am
a
I
chance to
supposed
answer.
a
Go ahead.
question
Go ahead.
if you two can't help but be all theatrical and like
Oh,
roll your
sorry.
head
Oh,
around like
you
a
saw
bowling
my
ball?
head moving and that scared you?
Oh
I'm
my
sorry.
God, Prime,
Stay
shut
still.
up. Prime, stop. Just stop.
Jesus
Let me
Christ.
answer.
Landre, go ahead.
So if I were him, I would have already said, I will continue to drop these, then yeah, you're not gonna just like bluff.
Okay. If
That's
they
it,
wouldn't have
that's-
surrendered after a third bomb, then would you have dropped a fourth?
I don't know.
Oh, if he doesn't know now. Okay, great.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever.
That's a
It's just
respectable
really
answer.
hypothetical,
It's
but, you
not.
know, that's
It
fine.
really
Well,
isn't. Don't run off the hook, Eucharist. You're too
I,
nice.
I think
That's okay.
there's a point of nuance there that if they had dropped a third nuke, they didn't have a fourth one for a couple of months.
Can I answer? Well, let's
That's
just
not-
let's assume they
that's
have a
not a
million
flip
nukes,
question.
right? Let's
That's-
just
that's
Let Ellis
we
speak of the
have to
flip
answer the
side.
question.
Let's let Ellis speak of the flip side, and then I really want to go.
yeah. I want to answer Wick's question so we can carry on with this conversation, right? So Laundry is not going to answer the question.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, so it's all right. It should happen.
I'm sorry that my answer was not one that you.
That's okay.
I'm glad you
That's okay. Ellis,
apologized.
speak
I'm
up.
glad you
It's okay. It's
apologized for
okay.
your incompetence. Go ahead.
It's okay. I don't think you're incompetent. I think you're just sussing out new arguments. It's fine. Yeah. So Wick, what do you do if they don't surrender? And I'm president LSP. You continue with the naval blockade, right? You starve them out. As Primes pointed out, Japan didn't really have much of a military. So I mean, what are they going to do? Like fight you with hopes and dreams at this point? There's really nothing they can do. Beating Japan militarily is like
we were
kicking a cripple,
actively,
like
just to be clear, we were
active.
actively losing soldiers, even
Yeah,
like,
because
we
we're
were
still fighting.
I would
defeated-
really love to hear. No, hang on. I would really love to hear from your side, just real quick. Are you aware of what kamikaze pilots are and what?
No, I've
they
never
were-
heard. I'm totally new to this.
The ineffective kamikaze pilots, yeah, we know about them.
If they had actual pilots, there wouldn't be kamikazes. That's how desperate they were, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, they
Yeah,
were
exactly.
sending-
But the point stands that they were taking unskilled pilots, throwing them in death traps, and continuing to launch them at U.S. and British naval targets. This
and
isn't something that just
they
ended
had
after
a less
Iwo
than
Jima.
20% accuracy rate. Like most of the time, the vast majority of the time, they missed. But like you said, they were death traps. They were poorly constructed because once again, and I'll remind the audience in case you forgot, the Imperial Japan could not prosecute this war, meaning they couldn't build the planes. They couldn't build more ships. They couldn't build like proper planes. They had poorly trained pilots, and like all your job is to like end your life by hitting the side of a battleship, and they failed that more than 80% of the time. But this is what we're supposed to be afraid of. Amazing. Yes, people are going to die like if there's a hot war going on. That's fair, right? But those are military men who went there to fight a war. We're talking about like, should we have slaughtered 220,000 civilians? And the answer is no.
But you're saying
and the last thing I'll say is that I promise, LSP was absolutely right. Naval blockade for a country that can't do anything about it. And remember, the reason why we could even launch the nukes in the first place is because they had no anti-air capabilities. Like, but we didn't lose a single. I think it was B-52 bomber.
That is a joke. Are you kidding me?
We didn't lose anything. They couldn't fight us back. Go ahead.
You're insane.
Okay, I think the fundamental question here is whether
good work.
Okay, I think this is the fundamental question. The question is, if we didn't drop the nukes and we were forcing Japan into the unconditional surrender, I think we all agree here that we probably don't want Imperial Japan, that Imperial Japan is very bad, that we don't want them to hold on to territories where they had committed awful war crimes, and would probably continue to treat those people horribly. So the question is, in a world where we don't drop the nukes and instead we have to continue to prosecute the war, how many lives are lost? And that fundamentally, I think, comes down to an evaluation, not of what we think, but what the Allies thought at the time. I personally am really iffy about whether or not I would drop the bombs, even in the first place, but that is not the same as a moral condemnation. When we're making an evaluation about whether or not the Allies reasonably believe that this would save more lives, us coming to a different conclusion is not necessarily in itself saying they're immoral. If they're still making their best faith effort to genuinely try and save lives, then we have to take that into consideration, even if we think they're wrong. And furthermore, I don't think they're that wrong. We have to keep in mind, they had just fought a standstill war to the very bitter end against Germany, all the way to Berlin, long after Germany knew they were going to inevitably lose, long after lots of people inside Germany were pushing for surrender, and they knew that they weren't going to be able to offensively prosecute the war. They still had to fight to the bitter end. And in that process, lots of civilians died. I think the fundamental question is, did the Allies have a reasonable basis for believing that forcing an unconditional surrender on Japan without the nukes would actually cause just as much or potentially even more civilian casualties and casualties of resources on both sides? And in that question, I think the Allies have a strong enough case that means that we can't morally condemn them.
I don't think they have a
Eucharist.
strong enough case, so I think we should
Yeah.
talk about this. So, we often talk about this in terms of numbers, and I think we should because that's how most people try to justify this. Again, I don't think it necessarily does because of the combatant non-combatant divide. But so where we typically get our top of the head numbers for what casualties would have looked like if we had pursued a land invasion, if we had blockaded and starved them out, that sort of thing. Typically, we take a lot of people take the Truman 500,000 number, which comes from his memoirs in the 50s. I had a signed copy of those that I sold on eBay because I didn't want to have blood signatures in my library. But the 500,000 number comes from Truman's memoir, and we know that's inflated. The million number comes from the Stimson article in Harper's in 1947, and we know that's even more inflated. They had every reason to sort of puff up the numbers that they were told to make it sound better in hindsight. What we know is that prior to the decision to drop the bomb, before the ultimatums were issued, there were military advisors telling Truman it was in the neighborhood of like 46,000, under 100,000 for sure. That rose as we pursued the Pacific Theater, for sure. Like we knew it could be in the 100,000s, but nowhere near the 500 and nowhere near the million. Those numbers were just pulled out of their asses later on. There's no evidence that that's actually what they thought it was going to be at the time they made the decision to drop the bomb. There just isn't.
Yeah, sorry, hold on. Setting aside the 500,000 and million plus number, when you're talking about the 46,000 number, is that talking about just civilian casualties on the Japanese side, or is that talking about civilian casualties and military casualties on both sides?
I believe the 46,000 number was from Truman's military advisor saying this is up to 46,000 U.S. casualties in this invasion, I believe.
Okay, yeah.
Total casualties, I think, was always in the neighborhood of 100,000-ish or a little bit more, but it was never anywhere close to those.
Casualties is all encompassing. It means injuries too.
Right.
The 25 to 46,000 figure comes from an article by Bernstein, and it's based on it means death. That's how many people would die, not how many people would be injured.
Excellent. Yes, okay, and if that's only U.S. Military casualties, then that's missing a huge part of the question that I think is the best defense for this, which is that there was a genuine belief on the Allies that this had a significant chance to actually save more civilian lives compared to a protracted invasion.
If I may offer a point that I don't think has been made yet, we're focusing pretty extensively on just Japan here when we're talking about civilian casualties, as though the Allies had some kind of lock on every single Japanese position throughout the Pacific Rim. We didn't. So it's a little bit narrow of a viewpoint to forget that there were civilians being killed and injured by Japanese soldiers and the Japanese occupation in various places throughout Southeast Asia. And the estimates that I saw for this were between 100,000 to 250,000 per month for each month in 1945. So
I'm fine with that, with those numbers, but I don't know how them killing civilians in other places means that we now get to kill civilians. That doesn't, to me, calculate or doesn't matter.
It's not that. It has to do with how many civilians in total wind up dying. It's not to say that killing civilians is a good thing. It's to say that if you drop bombs at all, there's going to be some collateral damage.
And it's a question of how many lives are going to be lost by the war not being brought to a sooner end. That's like the fundamental question. Right. Did dropping the nukes, by virtue of causing the war to end sooner, actually save more net lives? Okay. And in that question, it is incredibly relevant what brutalizations are still being taken by the Imperial Japanese Army.
Sure, but does it not also matter who is doing the brutalization, right? The fact that there are other brutalizations happening doesn't cleanly justify me doing brutalization. They're doing horrible things and killing civilians does not mean that now I get to do that on my own.
Because there's a difference. Because there's a huge difference. The difference between brutalization for brutalization's sake. For example, a great example would be the way in which when the Luftwaffe bombed Warsaw, they marked on their map specific Jewish neighborhoods. There's no military reason to do that. It's only just because you hate Jews and want to kill Jews. Versus if you are killing civilians as a means to an end. And yes, I know, you meant at the end just by the means. But unironically, yes. Sometimes if you can kill 200,000 people in Japan to save 1 million, not saying that was the actual calculus, but for example, if the Allies were certain that was the case, then obviously we would say that, and they were even right about the case, obviously we would say they're justified. So the important question is, did they have a genuine belief that this was going to save more lives, even at cost more lives in the interim? Because it is absolutely true, you can't prosecute a war without some level of collateral damage. The question is the collateral damage only happening as part of your good faith effort to try and end the war?
LSP, you go first before I lose my goddamn mind.
Yeah, I kind of want to interrogate this position that the civilian deaths are a means to an end, right? That if you kill 200,000 civilians, but it saves 1 million civilians down the line, it's justifiable. Let's say instead of nuking 200,000 civilians, we just executed 200,000 Japanese hostages, right? We had 200,000 Japanese hostages. If you don't surrender, we're going to shoot these fucking guys in the head. We shoot them all in the head, and they're like, we got 1 million more, baby. right? If we make that threat and we do that, and that gets them to surrender, is that morally justifiable?
Yep.
Okay, you're insane. You're ISIS.
Why? I super don't agree. Why is it the case?
You were because you're using state violence on innocent people to extract a political end. You're a terrorist.
Okay, you are. This is a statement that is going to be true of any prosecution of war, any kind of strategic bombing. Earlier, you said laundry. Do you really think any of us are against prosecuting war with any sort of casualties? Using political using violence of the state to a political end and hurting and targeting civilians in the process. That is going to be true of any kind of bombing campaign.
You're targeting.
So
we agree that intent matters. You threw a targeting in there as if that's irrelevant. It's not. The actual targeting of civilians versus them being necessary
knowledgeably targeting something that you know is going to kill civilians.
This is very simple. Holy crap. Like, we understand this under international law. How a person died actually matters, right? The weapons that we use to kill people, that matters, right? And their state, in terms of like what they're classified at the moment, matters, right? So if they're classified as civilian, that means something different than a military target. And that means something different than a POW. So executing POWs, like he just said, right? Like, just like slaughtering them to get the state to do that.
Hostages, civilians.
It's civilians, but it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter because he's just doing that utilitarian calculus to him, and he's like, "Yeah, I guess this works, right?" Like,
I'd rather save the 800,000 people
pouring in the streets to be fine. Oh, we had Japanese people. Actually, we did. We had them in concentration camps. We did.
Here's the problem with pulling that lever, Trace.
You would have been fine.
You normalize pulling that lever.
If you made the case to Flow Trace that if we slaughtered the people within the Japanese concentration camps here in the States, right? If we had done that, he'd be like, yeah, I guess that works, right? It'll end the war. So amazing. Moving on though, like let's be very clear. You didn't follow it. I'm sorry. Like, you got to keep up. So the invasion wasn't happening. That's another thing. The invasion, America had taken that off the table. Why? Because they understood, and this is important, so I'll remind you, that the Imperial Japanese could not prosecute the war. They couldn't do it. So there was no reason to invade. They understood how costly that was. So they weren't going to do it. The naval blockade that LSP very helpfully mentioned previously was the strategy, right?
Sure.
They knew.
Can I ask just about this blockade? Do we have numbers, and I don't know if we do, of how many Japanese civilians would have starved had the blockade continued?
I don't think so, but
they were starving. To be clear, there was a huge famine. They couldn't get enough food in there. Like they were starving.
They were.
So how many would have died with the blockade?
We don't know, but it would have been fewer than the nukes because they were already on their way to surrender by November anyway. Like, they were already. Like,
you can't know that. You can't. This is super.
You can't know the numbers of lives saved, but you're leaning on it for your entire moral calculus. Like,
no. You can make. No. To be clear, you can make estimation. You can say there's a chance. There's a chance. You can't say you know.
Make an estimation of when they would have surrendered, can't I?
There's a fundamental and important difference between incinerating people to death and starving them to death. Right. One is very, very passive and has to do with the actions of the government. Another is a deliberate action by us to target them to kill them.
I don't think it was.
Let's talk about this blockade. I want to answer this question more directly. As far as I understand, right? And I don't pretend to be an expert on this particular issue. I haven't seen figures on this particular issue. Okay. All right. So I'm going to preface that.
Line 4, Prime. Damn. Read.
But I'm sorry. Yeah. But like the Japanese had the ability, right, previously to feed themselves. What I think was the problem, it wasn't, I mean, I'm sure they were importing food, but mostly, from what I understand, they were importing military products, right? And like, what if people were starving? The thing that was doing that, right, was our bombing campaign, our indiscriminate moral bombing campaign. I say moral bombing because we're trying to break, or morale bombing because we're trying to break the morale of those the Japanese civilians so that the government would fall. Yeah, but in any case, we destroyed their infrastructure completely, right? And these were the other cities that we had flattened before we dropped the nuclear bombs. Once we dropped the nuclear bombs, you know what the response was from the Japanese Supreme Council? Meh. They've been bombing our other cities. They've destroyed dozens of them already, right? This is just a more efficient way of doing it. Whatever. We're a totalitarian government, and we don't give a fuck. Like, they could not prosecute the war. That's the thing that we need to focus on. Oh, also, the U.S. is. Oh, sorry. One more thing. And I'll very quickly, right? I believe it was Flow Trace. If I'm wrong, I apologize. Who brought up like the Nazis during the Blitz? Like,
Yep.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. That showing that they were racist and they were doing racist things, right? Let's not forget that the U.S. government was also racist. We don't remember this part. This part that we don't talk about. But like, we can look back at those racist cartoons that the U.S. government put out. We can look back at how the U.S. officials talked about it, including Truman himself, who called the Japanese beasts, and you have to treat them like beasts, right? If you want to tame them, that's how we talked about that. We had the whole.
Do we really want to go down this road where we
No, we don't. We don't. Just move on. We all agree.
Hey, I want to give Laundry some space. Laundry, go ahead.
On a Japanese
hold on, let me finish. I didn't finish my point. Hold on, let me finish my point. I'm almost done. Right. So we have someone like nattering got in my way. Yeah. So like we were a absolutely racist nation. This is before like the civil rights movement even passed, right? Literally no reforms. We had been penning the Japanese in concentration camps, and long before Japan had been picked as the target, right? Like years before, Japan had been picked as the target, and not Germany. This is before Germany surrendered, and not Germany. Why is it? I don't know. Maybe it's because we look down at them as less than human. Let's not forget that.
Well,
done.
I want to let Laundry go, but I mean, the reason was because they bombed Pearl Harbor. Why we targeted them first. It was personal. That Germany won. But anyway.
I'd like to go
we already finished bombing them. And we're talking about moral justification. Well, first of all, we've already paid them back, right? We've already destroyed other harbors there, other military harbors. We've done that.
Yeah, Pearl Harbor doesn't matter.
And then Pearl Harbor, of course, doesn't matter, right? And talk about a moral justification, there still is none. Because as our friend Euclid said, just because they did something doesn't mean we have to do something. And the people who died were civilians.
$10 from Draven 1895 to say, guarantee if this wasn't the U.S. who did the 2 nukes, the lefties wouldn't care. Laundry, go ahead.
Yeah, Wick, just something really quick here. I wanted to add, because our resident expert on the military preparedness of the Japanese military got wrong that the Japanese certainly did have anti-aircraft artillery in multiple forms. They had interceptor fighters that would be launched up in the sky. They had radar and early warning systems, balloon barrages. So there were a whole number of things, and I just think that people should keep that factual inaccuracy in mind as we're hearing from people who are speaking very.
It sounds like great military targets to bomb.
I want to cite some factual military authorities here.
I was only responding to
Laundry, finish your point.
Statement that they definitely didn't have any sort of anti-air capabilities.
I didn't say they didn't have any sort, right? I said that they didn't have. Well, maybe I said that. If I did, then I didn't speak. Then I apologize for that.
Oh, okay.
They had no effective anti-air.
Yeah, we don't mean literally no guns and no.
Yeah, they had guns pointed at the side, but like we were doing our bombing campaigns, and we were extremely successful because they had no effective way to fight back. If I said no, not any at all, but I do apologize for that.
Okay, I'd like to respond to the question of passive versus active killing, specifically in regards to the example of executing POWs. I super don't think this is a meaningful difference. If we blockade and prevent civilians from eating and they starve to death, I think that's just as much on the U.S. morally as if the U.S. shot those people directly. If anything, I think it's even worse because when you blockade, that is incredibly indiscriminate because you have no idea who is going to get the allocated small amounts of food versus who isn't. I think the fundamental question is saving lives. I think there might be some distinction between a torturous death, right? Like skinning someone alive is probably worse than shooting them in the head. Well, I think that argument also flows in favor of the blockade being very morally bad. I don't think you can create then a unique moral condemnation of bombing knowing that it's going to target civilians in the sense, or rather knowing that the targets you're going to hit are going to include collateral damage on civilians. I apologize for the mixed up in wording there, because that principle is just as true of civilians or of civilians.
How do I turn your speed down? How do I turn your talking speed from 0.75?
Flow Trace is great.
For example,
This is epic. I love it.
For example,
He's
if
making
we
half
took
my points
people,
for me at double speed.
yeah, for example, if we went in and took someone off of life support, someone's on life support, and we go and we turn that off, we take it away, like you're murdering the person if you're not like actively like shooting them in the head or killing them. If you induce conditions intentionally, even if there's a couple steps removed that are going to kill people, then I think you're morally responsible. And then just real quick,
food to Japan at this point.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Who's giving food to Japan at this point in the war?
They had other territories outside of their outside of mainland Japan. Right?
Yeah, I'm not sure the relevance of that. The fundamental question of does the blockade and the attack on
here is incorrect though, right? Because this kind of assumes that like it's an either or thing, right? Well, we could do a blockade, or maybe we could drop these nukes, and then we can weigh these things. But we were doing the blockade anyway because that was our plan, and they couldn't do anything about it because, once again, in case you might have forgotten, they couldn't prosecute the war. They could do nothing about that.
I agree they can prosecute, and I agree it's not an either or. I can trigger this. I can save us some time. I agree it's not an either or. The only question is, they could do both. The only question is, how many civilian deaths would it cause? And I think morally, the civilian deaths caused by the blockade are just as bad as civilian deaths caused by the nukes. So therefore, it's only a numbers question.
Eucharist.
And I think
whatever. So one other thing I want to introduce, and then I want to hear from everyone else. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not running this. But I apologize. I apologize. Don't get mad at me. But
okay, now I'm planning to look. I saw what happened, right? With anime in the state of anime. I think we should have used more nukes. I'm gonna go that hot.
Okay. But like, yeah. So there was another option. Rather than doing this, we could have just like done a demonstration. We could have demonstrated for Japan and for the rest of the world the power of our nuclear weapon, right? We know they worked because we did the Trinity test, and they worked. We could have taken representatives and shown this is the thing that we're going to do. If it's a scale of damage possible, we could have absolutely just done that. Why not?
If it were so simple, then why didn't they, in your opinion?
Because they were. I can.
There was a race to get out the Japanese surrender.
Yeah,
Truman had a race with Stalin.
Well, there's that. And there was a lot of things, a lot of factors, right? A lot of competing parties. Some of them, like the military, wanted to use it. Like we had put so much money into this program. It had completed, and they're like, we're going to just do this, right? We've been playing with.
You don't think that the military had like any moral consideration? They were just like giddy to just like slaughter a bunch of like.
No, not all of them. I'm sorry. When I say military,
Curtis LeMay was pretty giddy, yeah.
Yeah, some of them were, but not literally all of them. But some of them were like the bombing campaigns, the morale bombing campaigns, right? Like the Blitz, you know. Like there were members of our military who loved that, who thought like this was the greatest idea. Bomb the population until they give up, until they rise up against their oppressors. But that didn't work. And they thought maybe the nukes will do it. But that didn't work either. But, so there were lots of reasons why they like continued on with it, like more than I can name here. But yeah, so.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just have to say, because you just said the nukes didn't work, and they did. Like, are you arguing that in the intervening 7 days something else happened?
The Soviet invasion of Manchuria.
The Soviet invasion did happen.
Yeah, that's what happened.
That's exactly what happened.
Eucharist.
You think that wasn't already clear to them from the fact that they had been
No, it wasn't. No,
it blindsided them. It literally blindsided them.
They were told by the Russian, the Japan ambassador to Russia, right? Who was in the Kremlin or whatever.
I'll get you, Eucharist. Don't worry.
He told them that like this was going to happen, that they were going to invade, that you should just surrender now before this happens, and they refused to listen to him again until the moment it happened. They thought. Russia is on our side until they actually declared war. Russia might maybe negotiate that peace I was talking about previously.
Okay, but keep in mind though that the declaration of war by the Soviets was after the first nuke drop.
Yeah, I want Eucharist to go.
Because they were doing it anyway. Sorry.
I think that I found something that's been frustrating me perhaps about what Flowtrace is suggesting. So I think one problem here is that we might be confusing two different sets of deaths. So I think so. Most ethical systems, most ethical people would distinguish between non-combatant and combatant deaths. It's such that torturing and murdering civilians doesn't cleanly become justified if we just somehow prove it results in overall fewer lives lost altogether if we're taking them all in a basket. But I think 𝕵𝖎 seems to be saying we want to calculate narrowly based on civilians dead in situation A versus B, and we chose A because we genuinely thought it would result in fewer civilians dead, and that's probably the better choice if we're being super good faith. Even if I agree with that, I don't think that was the actual calculation that was involved. I think it was civilian deaths if we drop the nukes on Japan versus the number of people, Americans, I think were prioritized that will die if we invade. Yes, they were calculating other civilian deaths involved, but I think really the issue was we don't want to make what we did make.
Sorry, yes. Should that matter, though? Should it not matter when you are at war? The number of dead on your side versus the number of dead.
Obviously,
total.
you would hope to reduce that, but I don't think we can cleanly say, well, we can kill 10,000 grannies who aren't doing anything to save 20,000 of our troops. I don't think that works. So, but even if we agree, even if we agree, all right, that this is what actually happened, they made this decision on this basis, I still think the calculation is sort of impossible. So for the example of the blockade and people starving to death, we have in the real world situation of dropping the nukes, we have radiation poisoning and sickness and just extreme torture. We have examples of people narrowly escaping one bombing only to get incinerated at the other or to get cancer later on, right? So there's like sort of unimaginable torture that goes on in the use of the bombs that I think at least weighs on the side of, wow, this was pretty sick, and should prejudice against it.
I'm glad.
Hang on. One last thing before I'll shut up for a while. One last thing is that I think also in the option of blockade versus nukes, in one situation, the nukes, the choice is irreversible and unimaginably cruel in a way that should prejudice against it, and the other one is not irreversible. It's something that we can let off on if we need to. We can seek other options if we need to. So I'm not entirely sure that these are fair comparisons. Anyways.
Okay, so this is something I really need to get into because I'm glad you raised the radiation thing, and I just want to clarify a couple of points, okay? Not to imply that there's any sort of bad faith, but I think...
I'm always happy to be corrected on historical record, please.
Well, so, and I want to clarify before I go on a little mini rant that everything I am about to say is agreed to not only by the U.S., but by the Japanese, and not just now, but in 1945. Like, the month after this, all of this was understood to be true facts, okay? So the extent of the radiation was limited to, most estimates are that basically the first second of the blast was when people were most badly exposed to radiation. Now, I want to clarify before I go any deeper, I am not in any way trying to say that dying of radiation poisoning is not a horrible death. But that when you look at the total impact of the radiation, we didn't know what to expect. We really didn't have a way to measure it in advance. So again, part of this was figuring out what this even does. We didn't know how bad it would be until after we had already done it. And that's, I think, an important element of kind of hindsight bias, right? That certainly for the second bomb, we can have a completely different discussion. But for the first bomb, we just did not know about the radiation effects because the totality of it is that it dissipated within about 1 minute. You had to be right there when the bomb went off in order to get exposed to radiation. And again, not to discount people who died kind of immediately from very severe radiation effects, but for the survivors, longitudinal studies indicated that while they had a slightly higher incidence of developing cancer, that those cancers were not any more fatal than any other form of cancer, and that in terms of average life expectancy, it was only a couple months less than the unaffected population. So it's not to say that those are not bad things, or that, you know, we should not consider those in terms of how you walk forward, but certainly the longitudinal stuff, you're not going to know that 6 days later. And in terms of the immediate short-term impact, it was either you got a really heavy dose of radiation and that was it, or you got a dose and it basically didn't have that big of an effect on you in the long run. Not that it didn't worsen your outcomes, not that you weren't collateral damage, but that it wasn't some horrific these people are falling to pieces and that sort of thing. It wasn't like that, and there was no evidence of like environmental damage or anything like that on any level. That
Okay, I want LSP to go, then I want Flowtrace to go.
Yeah, PvP. Do you not have a problem with us using a weapon which has lingering after damage that we didn't know about? Like, why didn't we know about this before we used it? Should we have used it if we didn't know what it would do afterwards?
Well, because the radioactive impact, again, it dissipates within about a minute. It isn't that there's zero radioactive residue, but again, the Japanese and U.S. authorities agree that there's no appreciable impact. Like, it's the equivalent. I don't even know.
We know there is now, right? We know that radiation poisoning kills.
Well, hold on. We know there is, but like the Radium Girls only settled out of court like what, 38? Like that's only like 4 or 5 years before this. Like we definitely, the U.S. definitely did not have an understanding or even I think an inkling of super long-term radiation effects.
Dial the speed down to like 0.7. Why are we using a bomb? Why are we using a bomb if we don't know the impact that it's going to have?
It is a different thing to say that you affirmatively don't know what the impact is versus you don't even realize that there could be. Those are two fundamentally different things. Saying, man, I don't know what could happen. Who knows?
It's the power
versus
of the
saying,
sun. Maybe
I know
we should wait
nothing is going to happen.
use it until we learn exactly how this radiation can linger.
Listen, there is going to be some uncertainty, of course, with new technologies. But,
Just putting this out
there's a
there,
huge distinction.
Flowtrace, just putting this out there, right, before we go forward, if the Japanese had been testing this, they would have tested it on humans beforehand. They would have been very sure, right? There's a reason we know that the human body is 70% water. Thank you to the Japanese scientists for that. But yes, what would you have suggested we
What do you mean
if
the Japanese had a nuclear program?
I wouldn't testing it on people. I have no problem with demonstrating the bomb's effectiveness on an island, which is what some of the scientists had proposed. I think that would have been fine.
Flowtrace, continue.
Oh, sorry. I was actually interrupting LSP. So LSP, I want to give you a chance to finish your thing before I go on my full response.
Oh no, I was
okay. Cool.
It's actually PvP who has brought that point. I was more curious about like if he has any issue with using a bomb where you don't know.
Well,
what
let's
the
answer that.
are.
PvP, go ahead.
Well, again, so part of what I'm saying here is that when we had done the Los Alamos test, we had gotten similar results to what we got at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which was that the measurement of increased radiation was for an extremely brief period of time. And that the lingering effects, because I'm hearing lingering effects. I don't know the exact measurements off the top of my head, but this is one of these things, like we've all heard this about how when you go up in an airplane, you're exposed to a background level of radiation, like when you get an X-ray and shit like that. And the conclusion of both Japan and the United States is that there is no impact in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that any residual increase in background radiation is so minimal as to have no practical effect.
Yeah, I think on the radiation question, there's a fundamental epistemic, I think I might be using that word incorrectly, epistemic difference between affirmatively thinking that there will not be an effect and then being wrong about that and being unsure about what that effect is. Like, for example, if like the COVID vaccine, for example. Let's say in 30 years, it turns out that the COVID vaccine does have long-term health effects. Would we go back and say, Pfizer, you are morally culpable because you don't you think you should have figured out and whether or not there would have been effects 30 years on the line? Like, that's a really big difference than not doing your due diligence, thinking maybe there is something here and not looking into it. And it is firmly the case that the United States, the scientific community at the time, genuinely believed that there were no long-term effects. Like, I think the only first radiation documented death was in like 1945. So we can still say that that's bad. We can still say, you know what, you were wrong. You were wrong. Yeah. But there is a really but there is a huge and massive difference between you not caring, which I think is sort of the characterization let's give earlier about what the effects might be because we're dropping it on the Japanese, so who cares? And thinking, no, yeah, there are going to be effects and being wrong. There's a really, really big difference between those.
Just like I'd suggest there's a really big difference between providing people health care and having some side effects from that and intentionally killing people, not understanding how the effects can linger even beyond that.
Yes, of course the difference. That's what an analogy is. Yes, of course that's what an analogy is, but the fundamental question of failing in your due diligence and just being wrong, that is the same between those analogies. Even if then the second and third order impacts would be different and how we would morally evaluate them, those are massively different, and that difference is illustrated by that example, and that it holds between the two examples. The other thing I wanted to get on Euchre's point about civilian death versus the deaths of civilians versus the deaths of soldiers, which we value them more, I think this is a really thorny thing. The reality is it has to be a balance. It absolutely can't be the case that you infinitely value your own soldiers' lives. Like, for example, you know what would really save lives if we never captured towns and we just wiped them off the face of the earth. Not unlike what Russia did and like the Soviet Union did in Afghanistan, for example. That would be an example of something where clearly you're valuing soldiers to life. But equally, would we say that like in order to when there is one civilian life at stake, we're going to order all of our soldiers in? The reality is there has to be a tension there that you're trying to optimize for civilian life, but fundamentally you are still trying to win a war, because the ultimate thing that's threatening civilian lives is the war. So you're going to optimize for trying to win the war, which is generally going to have you try to optimize for saving lives, which is why I think that flows back into my moral calculus. And when you look at the Russian invasion that was brought up, I think that actually flows to pro-nuking side, because this is an example of an invasion that is going to have lots of civilian casualties. The Soviet Union is not the most moral conductors of wars, and wars are really messy. Wars are really invasions and wars are really messy. There are going to be lots of civilian casualties. That uncertainty, I think, all flows to the pro-nuking side. The only thing, I think this is the most key framing issue. The only thing you need to demonstrate, I think, in order to say that you cannot morally condemn the droppers of the nukes, is to demonstrate a genuine uncertainty they had about which option would save more lives. So every time we were like, well, there's an indication they would have surrendered in November. There's an indication that, you know, they would have given an unconditional surrender without a long-term campaign. These are reasons why the Allies, and specifically the U.S., were more uncertain about whether or not they would be able to force a quick end to the war without lots of civilian casualties, and that's a reason why you can't morally condemn them. Even if we would say we wouldn't drop the bombs, there's a difference between saying we would not drop the bombs, or they were factually incorrect, and it was a war crime, or it was deeply immoral. That's a fundamental difference.
Can I please go after you, Chris? Because I'm about to fucking explode.
Yeah,
please.
I need to clarify.
Will it be
I
a
guess, like,
radiation leak
what your
explosion or no?
moral calculus is, I guess. So are you saying, in terms of like judging retroactively whether something was justified in the way, at least in the way we're trying to do it in this conversation, you're just emphasizing sort of their intent and not sort of actuality? Because I did want to say, like with principles that point, I would love to see some, like, your sources on Japan's agreement on these things, because from what I'm reading, what we're seeing is like the people who were actually exposed had like some pretty, especially children, had some pretty severe long-term consequences, leukemia incidents and things like that. It had less of a result on their children, for example, than we thought it might. But like the people who were actually there, who weren't immediately incinerated and who didn't die of radiation poisoning immediately afterwards, did, it seems, have some pretty severe consequences, and people who are exposed in utero, that sort of thing. So I would love clarification on that. But so to Flow Trace's point though, so are you saying like you are just judging them on what they could have reasonably known at the time, not the actual consequences afterwards? Because that's sort of my intuition on the blockade thing, is like what we reasonably know at the time is, yeah, actually the threat of starvation is terrible, and that could just as likely induce a surrender in short order as a freaking bomb, and that's something that we can pull away from. Whereas in the case of the bomb, we actually just nuked 100,000 civilians, right? So that's why my moral intuition, I think, kind of pushes the other direction. I don't know. Go off, Prime, and everybody else. I don't know.
Okay, so another difference between a blockade and a bomb. Let's say it was the case that a critical amount of Japan's food was being imported, right? I don't actually believe that's the case, but let's say that was the case, right? In a blockade, people start to starve and society starts to fall apart slower. That buys us time to get them to agree to a political surrender, rather than immediately eliminating these things. So these things aren't the same. They don't play out the same. So I need to make that clear. All right. So a few things I just want to go over, because someone, either is it Principles or Andre, I forget which one, like mentioned that, well, the Russians invaded after Hiroshima, the bombing of Hiroshima, and like that somehow invalidates my point. I don't understand. Hiroshima.
25 seconds. My only explanation was that I think the invasion of Russia demonstrates the long-term impacts of not bringing the war to a close, because Russia's going to be invading, they're going to be fighting battles, and civilians are going to die in that process. Not that the nukes caused the Russians to invade. I don't believe that whatsoever.
I don't think it was you. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I made the specific point you're referencing, and just to be clear, the only point in bringing that up was to say that it's hard to argue that the only reason for the ultimate Japanese surrender was just because of the Soviet invasion, and that it had nothing to do with the nuclear bombings, because there already had been one. So it's hard to say that the nuclear war that was waged on them was not a part of the calculation at all. That's the only point I'm making.
fair enough, right? I think that they surely must have been part of the calculation. The point is, was it a significant portion of the calculation? And if we didn't do that, would we have arrived at a similar outcome? So Hiroshima drops, the Hiroshima bomb drops, and the Supreme Council, the Japanese Supreme Council, doesn't care because they didn't care about the civilians before. When we were when we were leveling their cities with carpet bombing previously, they didn't care. None of that swayed them. So when Hiroshima drops, right, and the Supreme Council meets and they talk about it, they're like, nah. Well, they're not meh. Sorry. One side still wants to push for a better type of surrender. The other side is happy with just keeping the imperial throne in place. So none of that. So I shouldn't. I want to be careful. I'm not saying that the bombs had no effect. Fair enough. But the principal thing that changed was that invasion, because their plan the entire time was to have Russia negotiate or help negotiate on their behalf to get peace deals, to have a better peace deal. So so I'm just trying to do a sanity check here, right? Does anyone disagree that the imperial? And I'm just yes or no, so we can move on quickly. I have 3 questions I got to ask, right? Could the
Just taking your
Japanese
job, man.
the Japanese prosecute the war? Yes or no? Does anyone think that they can prosecute the war? I should just ask that. At this point,
no.
Hold on. So
No.
I get the point you're making, but the real question is, would they try anyway? Whether or not they had the capability to really win the war doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to attempt to, because they are noodles in the brain.
What are they going to fight with?
Well,
Bamboo
they were.
sticks and rocks?
Let's be
No, but they
clear.
will cause
We know what would have happened. Look at what happened at Iwo Jima and the tunnels and things like that. Look at what happened.
Wait, I'm sorry. Those were soldiers, right? What we're inferring
I
is a
understand, but
completely
the
different
culture of
situation, right?
Imperial Japan at the time, right? Look at what happened in I think it was Okinawa, right? When we went into there. What did the civilians do? What did the civilians do in Okinawa?
Hold on.
Was it? I think it was
doesn't
Okinawa.
matter.
I'm pretty sure it was Okinawa.
Wick, it literally doesn't matter, because once again, invasion was off the table. That's another fact that we have to get on.
I don't think you can say for certain that it's all
Invasion,
good.
it absolutely was. No, hold on. We can look at the Allies. I'm not making this up. We can look at the communications between the Allies, right? We can look at what happened at Yalta, and then at was it the second meeting? There was Yalta, and then there was a second meeting. Potsdam. Thank you. Yes. Potsdam. We can look at what they were talking about, and then we're talking invading. They were thinking about the Russians invading at first, right? That's what Truman wanted, is that the Russians would do that for them. But we Americans had taken that off the table because we didn't need to. So I don't I don't care what happened at Iwo Jima. That's not. I wasn't on the table. The plan was a naval blockade. So in which way? So could they honestly prosecute this war in any significant manner? No, they couldn't. They couldn't do it navally. They couldn't do it by air in any significant manner. Did the Allies know what the Supreme Council was thinking? Yes or no? Did we know?
Not to the extent that you're saying, but to an extent, yes.
We had the cables going back and forth, talking about the priorities, right? From Tokyo to this Russian diplomat, this Japanese diplomat in Russia. We had the cables. We knew exactly what they wanted, what they were waiting for. Correct?
Because we had one set of cables, that means we knew absolutely every discussion that was taking place in Imperial Japan.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess. Oh, okay. Let me do this for you.
Can I ask
sure,
a
no
clarification?
I didn't mean that we had a transcript of the Emperor's brain. I'm sorry. I thought that was implied. But I didn't mean that. But I'll spell that out for you. No, we didn't have a transcript. But because of our code breaking,
but you're implying that that's
very
strong. You're implying that that's a really strong basis of evidence to use to make a conclusion about exactly what's going on in Tokyo.
Communication cables are a very big, strong basis of evidence to use. Yes,
exactly.
We have communication cables from the Emperor expressing a desire to surrender.
And furthermore, okay, so then let me just skip to this last question because that gets to the point, right? if we had said the Japanese could keep their emperor sooner, right? Like that we wouldn't hang the emperor. If we had said that we would do that sooner, would they have surrendered? And this is like literally the heart of the problem. So, yes or no? Would that happen sooner?
Sooner, asterisk. Yes.
Sooner. Okay, asterisk. I'll take it. Principles. Would it happen sooner if we had let them know that they could keep the emperor?
Yeah, absolutely, probably.
Okay, thank you so much.
And
Thank you so much.
I want to clarify that was a Truman hang-up. When we're talking like Potsdam and whatnot, that's the total Allies position. Like that's a negotiated effort, and I don't know that the rest of the Allies felt as strongly as Truman did. So no, I'm offering you a point there.
I understand.
Truman probably was not very helpful to the process. And I'm even going to go ahead and bite the bullet on the whole thing about would you drop the third nuke and all that. That I think, with respect to the first one, given that we don't know 100%, I think you can make it the justification that if you could force the surrender, that you go ahead and do that and try to minimize civilian death. After that, you only have 2 left, and my personal take would
100.
be that
would you just keep dropping them until they surrendered?
No, absolutely not.
What's the number for you then? If you settle at 3, why not 4? And if 4, why not 5?
No, I don't even go to 3. That's I guess what you're not getting here is if 2.
Oh, so just 2 is your max.
Well, I don't even know if 2 is my max. 1 might be my max, but what I'm trying to get at here is that at that point
-1. We nuke New York.
This is what we're willing to do to us. What do you think we're gonna do to you?
At that point you try to bring the international community more in, and you say, look at the fucking devastation that this weapon causes. We have more of them. We don't want to have to drop them on Japan, and maybe this helps.
Okay, I am asserting myself now. No, shut the fuck up! I've had my arm up so long, it's getting atrophied.
I was asking these questions to get to a point.
God damn it, Brian!
Look, I just want to make sure. I just want to make sure the white man gets preference on my stream. Okay, no, I'm kidding. I'm fucking around with you.
I swear.
LSP has had his hand up.
I just need Landry to answer, and then I can wrap up.
2 seconds. 2 seconds.
Landry.
Honestly, I was Googling something when you were asking the question.
I can ask it again.
The question went on for so long.
Sure, whatever. Yeah, I know. Small attention span. Got it. So I'll do it again. So if we had said that the Japanese could keep their emperor sooner, right? Yeah, let them know that was okay much sooner, would they have surrendered sooner?
I don't quite understand your question. Could they keep the emperor sooner?
His question is, if the U.S. promised Japan that they could keep the emperor, would Japan have surrendered sooner?
Probably. I don't know.
Okay, so we can understand, and this is where I'll wrap it up, I swear to God. We can understand that the sticking point here for both sides in the Supreme Council, when they were arguing back and forth, right? Both the more moderate side and the more militaristic side. The sticking point here was the emperor. That the imperial throne would be maintained, and they wouldn't like hanged in the streets. So if we had simply let them know, and we knew that was their sticking point, we had known that from the cables, right? And other military generals, not just from the cables, we have communications from our own generals who knew, right, and our own diplomats who knew that this was the biggest sticking point. If we had let them know sooner, that would have ended the war much sooner, and then we wouldn't have to use the bombs. Done.
LSP? Laundry, respond, then LSP.
I wanted to ask just a clarifying question that has to do with a lot of the claims that have been made so far, and with regard to like the cables, the value of those. Am I incorrect? And I totally could be, but it was my understanding that one of the big issues here was that the Supreme Council needed unanimous agreement on these matters before they would be able to proceed, and that was one of the reasons why
they just needed the emperor.
Lasted for so long.
They just needed the emperor. Once the emperor basically said the war's over, the war was over. The emperor was already looking for an out in July when those cables were released. You don't need the Supreme Council. Obviously, the council was split enough that there was a junior officers coup, right? Like there was an attempt. So you don't need them all to be unanimous. And as Prime pointed out, the big schism with them was the War Council was whether or not they would surrender unconditionally and just get it over with, or whether or not they should try to extract some concessions, continue fighting, see how that goes out.
Do we think?
Submarines going
But
crazy.
no matter what,
think-
they were both settled on like.
And let me ask you this, LSP, and then you can go because you can answer, right? You can answer, then you can go.
whatever. Go.
I never get to go.
Do we think it would have been okay to let the emperor keep power? Japan.
I mean, apparently it was. Like, apparently it's what we did. We let him keep power.
Fair enough.
So this was like 20 minutes ago, but Prime wouldn't shut the fuck up.
Many such
he
cases.
brought up this point about like this difference between a blockade and a nuke on a substantive level. I might add another substantive level. If you blockade people, yeah, you run a risk of them starving to death. If you nuke people, you set a precedent that you can nuke people. You set a precedent that these will drop the power of the sun on civilians. And now other people know you'll drop the power of the sun on civilians. And other people are going to develop this weapon too.
Wait, is that an argument for or against? Because I could see that going either way.
That's an argument against, unless you want to live in the world of Fallout, right? You don't want to live in a world where it's normalized to drop nukes on civilians.
Well, the argument, the Steelman, if I may just jump in, because I haven't jumped in yet, but the Steelman would be that one of the reasons that we haven't seen any other nuclear attacks or any other country has used a nuclear weapon was because of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and how horrific they were.
Pakistan
it set a
has
precedent in your way, just real quick. It set a precedent in a very real way that this is what happens, right, when you use this on a city. And so, because of the horror of that and the big bloody nose that we gave Japan, it has saved us.
Well,
this precedent.
Hang on. No. I want to go.
That it was a tool that was unknown.
I'm never going to go.
But I'm sorry.
Don't apologize to him.
Should I just raise my hand again?
No, LSP.
Like 2 hours.
LSP, go. LSP, go.
Fuck me. Okay. Wick, you brought up this point earlier about, well, let's look at Okinawa, right? We're seeing that.
It was Saipan, I think, but yeah, same thing. Right? I think I got that.
Whatever. Like, the point is, you're seeing civilians ending up taking up arms in the defense of their homeland,
and
right?
throwing themselves off cliffs and their babies,
or impressed in the military service the other way. Would you have favored nuking Germany for the same reason?
I think
because they had the Volkssturm.
If there was reasonable to believe that nuking Germany could have ended the war sooner, yes, I would.
Okay, this is a problem in your thinking then, because we have numerous wars where civilians are impressed in the military service by their state, right? Where they're either forced to, they're coerced to, they're propagandized to. For whatever reason, you have situations where civilians are going to fight tooth and nail, whatever the invading force is. If you're saying that, well, we could just end it sooner if we just nuke and assume the civilians are going to be part of the combating force, then you're laying the groundwork for more nukes in the future.
That's not the same.
Why not?
Because because the basis of knowledge or the basis of the reasoning for using the nukes as a means to save more lives does not necessarily rely on the idea that civilians would take up arms. Just that in the invasion, the civilians would.
That was
die.
Wick's argument. That was just Wick's argument.
No. You're misunderstanding his argument. You're misunderstanding.
You're making a better version of the argument than most people make.
You are. Trust me, you are. Because the reason why.
Wick, am I misunderstanding your argument?
Yeah, you are. And if Wick says otherwise, he's wrong too.
Fair enough. But can I just clarify?
No,
can I clarify my own stance on my own show?
The argument is that civilians would die. The fact that the civilians would fight is the particular reason why, but it is not the fundamental reason.
No, my only point in bringing up civilians at all, right? Because Prime was inferring, right, that we did not know or we didn't know what kind of would, and I was just saying we have precedent to see how civilians would respond. Right, in these situations. And so that was the only reason. That was the only reason I brought civilians at all. We knew what would happen, right? Because we had precedent before of how the same culture, the same people responded in similar situations.
Okay.
That's only
you have the same culture and the same people when there was the invasion of Iraq take up arms and join an insurgency. If it was necessary to nuke Mosul to free it from ISIS, would you nuke Mosul?
If ISIS had a bunch of Jews in concentration camps that were killing 6 million of them,
Yazidis in concentration camps. They have Yazidis and Kurds.
Yes, that was Mosul? Again. It was horrific, but there's lines we have to draw. There are certain amounts of horrors. Pragmatic reasons. If we could, I'll tell you my take on this, and it's perhaps my most imperialist take. If America could police the world successfully, I absolutely would. Right? I absolutely would. I would stop all the atrocities by force of arms. But we can't. We cannot. We simply do not have the resources to do that. So we have to make choices. We have to, and they're not all perfect, and it's pretty fucking messy, but we have to choose and make decides. There has to be lines that we don't go in things we do go in. So yes,
So if it were
in
feasible and
Germany, in
practical-
Nazi Germany, if I had reasonable suspicion that using a nuclear weapon on Munich or fucking German city, I don't know German cities, Berlin or something,
Dresden.
would have ended the war months to years sooner. Yes, I would do that.
If using a nuke on Seoul would have ended the Korean War, would you favor using the nuke?
Maybe.
If I had a reasonable suspicion that we could have stopped North Korea and North Korea wouldn't exist, yes.
If we could do the same with Saddam Hussein's Baghdad. If we nuke Baghdad, Saddam Hussein's no longer in Kuwait, his government topples, same story.
No, not in that
Why?
situation. I think there's a fundamental difference between
What is
Iraq
the
and North
difference?
Korea. Simply Iraq was...
Both are terrorist states which sponsor
Again,
terror
you're
groups and
conflating these
are
things as
developing
if
weapons of
all
mass destruction.
terrorist states are the same amount of bad, and they're just not, right?
Yeah,
Nor do
Saddam
they have the
Hussein's
same
Iraq
amount
was
of power.
worse.
North Korea...
Saddam Hussein's Iraq committed a genocide.
Yeah, it was bad, okay? But we were able to stop them with conventional means. Pretty fucking
We could have
quickly.
stopped Japan
28
with-
days.
we
It
were
only
able to
took us
stop Germany,
26
Nazi
to
Germany
28
with
days
conventional
in
means.
the
We
Gulf
could
War,
have,
right?
but the question is, what's the difference? We have. I think it's fair to say our ability to depose Saddam Hussein with conventional non-nuclear means is much greater, and we could do so with a much lower casualty rate of civilians than we could Japan.
Okay, what's substantive is that you normalize, with this logic, you normalize using nukes in warfare is the problem. You normalize okaying wide amounts of
But
collateral
that didn't
damage.
happen!
Yeah, how do you...
Wait,
do you
okay,
know
can I
that?
do- can I jump in,
That didn't
please?
happen
Please,
because
please,
we
please,
understand
please.
we shouldn't be doing this. What do you mean?
Can I-
Like,
can I please
you
jump
don't
in?
drop
Please?
nukes on people.
Please?
Yeah,
Wait,
go
but
for it,
wait,
Euchre.
but this is an argument against why
don't-
we shouldn't have done it, and we did do it,
No.
and this impact hasn't
Wait,
arisen.
can I? Yeah, please.
Hang on.
Oh my god.
Go ahead.
Sorry, that on the issue of precedent and normalization. If I buy Flowtrace's argument that we have to good faith interpret what they knew at the time, and that's what determines whether or not this is justified, then I do think that LSP is exactly right that this pushes back against the use of the nuke. We had no reason to believe that this would be the nuke to end all nukes. And in fact, we had military advisors strongly pushing for the use of nukes in Korea and Vietnam. Yes, technically. Now, in hindsight, exclusively in hindsight, which you've rejected, Flowtrace, by the way, in hindsight, we can see that it set a precedent. We can see now that it set a precedent where we hope that nukes will never be used again, but we had no reason to think that was the case because apparently, according to principles before politics, we had no idea how bad they would be. We had no idea before we dropped it exactly how bad it would be, so we had no reason to think the precedent would be set. So I just don't see how that doesn't push exactly back against your point.
No, I actually agree.
You're way over extrapolating my point. The fact that we didn't know what was going to happen from it doesn't mean that anyone was trying to imply at the time that this was something that was supposed to be normalized for war in the future.
I'm not saying anyone was implying it should be normalized. The risk is that it would be normalized by its use. That's the risk, and we don't know what's going to happen, so we have the benefit of hindsight. It's wonderful that now we don't use nukes regularly. We didn't know that was going to happen, and in fact, for a long time, we thought it would happen, and we pushed for it to happen. We almost dropped nukes on Korea and Vietnam!
Throwing this out there, Pakistan is like one terrorist revolution away from a legit terrorist state owning nukes.
That is a problem that we will have to unfortunately possibly deal with soon. And that's a question.
That, however, is an important distinction from a military use of nukes versus weapons. I don't think there is strong evidence in hindsight or at the time to believe that dropping the nukes would in any way open the genie, open the bottle and let the genie out in terms of developing nukes. That's only an argument in favor of military actively deploying nukes.
They knew. Okay, so before I counter Flowtrace, I just got to say this.
I'll be back in like 2 hours.
The people. Yeah, sure. The people in Okinawa aren't
like
the same
Alduin,
people.
LSP.
You're dropping
Aren't the
nukes
same
on
culture.
Prime, okay.
Hold on, Rick. The people in Okinawa aren't the same people. They aren't the same culture. They're the Ryukyu people, and they were taken over by Japan like a few decades before. And just, Rick's a racist. I've been saying this for years. Anyway, so moving on. Moving on, like people think Japan is a monoculture. It's not. They don't know that. But just I've educated you.
I watch a lot of anime.
How does that get rid of my point here? That under the same government and the same leadership with the same propaganda.
I'm just letting you know. Just letting you know you're a bigot. I didn't mean like your point was wrong. All right. So anyway,
carry on.
Back to. Back to Flowtrace. Fuck, I was so excited. Like, what was the last thing you said?
Something racist.
It was something racist.
Probably something racist. Probably. But before that, what was the last thing?
course, the black guy's calling everybody
Um,
racist again.
I
What
don't
was
I
the
don't
last-
remember what I said
don't remember
last.
last thing you said.
You guys were
Oh.
talking. Eucharist was yelling. Cat guy was yelling. There's a lot of yelling.
Landre was laughing.
Okay.
I was making salient points.
That's fair.
Absolutely.
Me too, Eucharist. Me too.
So I don't remember exactly what I was gonna say, but once again, we have a situation where like we're talking about like dropping. Oh no! Now I remember. Okay, you guys were talking about whether the nukes, like dropping the nukes, would encourage others to develop it, right? Of course, that was going to do that. We have a superpower who has created like the most destructive force in humankind. Why would other powers not want to?
Just to
they
let you know,
created it.
they
Yes,
were.
that-
They were
There were
developing it.
multiple
We were just
nuclear
first to do
programs
so.
already underway.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
No, yes, but that's just that Prime. The creation, I agree with. The dropping, no.
Hold on, sorry. So once we, right, the moral arbiters of the world had dropped those nukes on Japan, right? Others who are less as moral, as good, God-fearing Christians here, they wouldn't do that, right? To solve their problems, they wouldn't. They would have the sense better than Washington to not use nukes, which is why we don't need nuclear proliferation, right?
No, I think that
Nuclear proliferation. Sorry.
No, I think there's a absolute fair argument that from the perspective at the time, as Eucharist made, that dropping the nukes would push the normalization of deploying nukes in military conflicts. But when you talk about the impact of terrorist states obtaining nuclear weapons, that is not dependent upon the normalization of nation states using nuclear weapons. That's dependent upon the existence of nuclear weapons itself, which is not an impact of Hiroshima. It's an impact of Trinity and the many other nuclear problems that already existed.
Okay. If you're talking about terrorists, I guess.
Yeah, that's
it.
Yeah.
I wanna move the conversation on a little bit to nuclear deterrence as a whole and nuclear proliferation as a whole. So for those of you on the pro bombing Hiroshima side, crude, I know,
genocide,
right?
Wow.
But
On the pro incinerating innocent side, Wick, you gotta frame it correctly.
Are you
school children?
The pro saving more lives side. That's what I like to say.
Are you in favor? First of all, do we think nuclear deterrence is an actual thing? Does it work? And second of all, right? Are you for or against nuclear proliferation? I guess I'm assuming the answer to one's going to inform the answer to the second, but I'm curious. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, was that for me first?
That's for the pro innocenting civilian burning side. Yeah.
Nuclear proliferation is like vitamin B. A little bit's good, a lot of it's bad. I think that it is pretty. Now, I don't know if this is not an argument in favor of the people who made the bomb because they couldn't have known this. But I think it's pretty clear at this stage of human development that the auspice of nuclear warfare, I think, is generally a net good. Now, technically, it's very hard for us to evaluate this kind of thing because, if there is a 0.0001% chance of a nuke going off and then that escalating to a hot war, how do you truly evaluate that against, like, how do you risk adjust that? I don't know. But we've had a really big levels of unprecedented peace. Arguably, the fact that Russia and the United States have nuclear weapons is a reason why there isn't a land war in Europe right now, why there wasn't a land war in Europe in the aftermath of World War II. And this has been one of the most prosperous period in human history. The trouble, I think, is that this only operates when we have reliable actors, people like the United States or Russia, that do have vested interest. It does not work when we start getting nukes in the hand of terrorist states. So people like North Korea, people like Pakistan. So I think there is some real good to be had of having a world where there are a couple strong powers that do have nuclear weapons as a means to force global peace. But as nuclear weapons become more and more widespread, I think the risk starts to significantly increase that there is some sort of hot nuclear war. That's a reason why it's very important for us not to allow Ukraine to be invaded, because that will send a signal that the only way to stop yourself from getting invaded is to have nuclear weapons, and then every country on Earth will pursue nuclear weapons. That's a great reason to support Ukraine, y'all.
Hey, I wanna go through the pro side, then we'll get to the anti side too. PvP. What's your answer to these questions?
No, let Landre go. He hasn't spoken much.
I agree with everything that was just said. I think the only addition that I would make to it is that
you could follow that.
That wasn't that fast. Come on.
You gotta keep up, man. Come on.
I'm just saying,
go ahead.
Thank you. No, I agree with everything that was just said. I think the only addition that I would make is that I think that it just emphasizes the importance of reducing the number of nuclear weapons that are currently on Earth, to make sure that they don't fall into the hands of bad actors as easily.
Principles.
So I'm gonna give a completely different viewpoint here. A concept of nuclear deterrence, I don't think fundamentally holds any water. I don't know that I really think there's any substance to the argument. As has been acknowledged, if it gets into the hands of bad actors, you can't count on them to obey, the rules of engagement, so to speak. I do think the sticky wicket here, if you will, is that this was a Pandora's box that was opened as soon as nuclear fission was discovered, and that was 6 years before a bomb was deployed. And there's a reason that everybody and their mother had a nuclear program. It's because as soon as everybody knew what nuclear fission was, scientists who knew how to use that said, hey, you can cause chain reactions. Like, there's a potential for stuff here. And yeah, lots of people were trying to harness this stuff. So it wasn't really a matter of if, it was a matter of when and who, right? That once you open Pandora's box, there's no going back. All you can do is deal with the aftermath. So as soon as we know that this technology exists, the bomb is going to happen. And I think that if we're talking about better or worse outcomes, maybe it's for the best that the United States was the one that dropped that bomb, because it then informs international policy from that point forward.
Wait, real quick. Prime, you're shaking your head. Who would you rather have dropped the bomb in World War II?
Oh, I would have.
I think he would have rather no bombed.
I would.
What I'm trying to say is that you're not.
I'll answer that question very quickly. I would have preferred that the United States dropped the bomb, but like on a desert, and shown the world this. That's what I would prefer. Go ahead.
No, okay. I'm happy to kind of try to meet you halfway on that. In that I all I'm getting at here in terms of the proliferation and deterrence thing is just that you were never going to not have a bomb go off in a profound way, and it was probably best that it happened in some kind of controlled manner, as opposed to it being, a terrorist attack or something like that. Especially because as the technology gets bigger, the bombs get bigger, the impacts get bigigger. We're kind of lucky it was.
Pretty sure the Japanese felt terrorized.
Yeah, it was terrible.
I'm sure they. Well, okay, fair point. That's not what I'm trying to say. But maybe terrorist attack is the wrong word to use there. But
yeah, the Muslims didn't do it. Let's just say what we really mean.
Yeah.
No.
That's not fair.
We hear you, principal. We hear you.
No. Because that could have been terrorism in all other sorts of contexts. Like, it could have been the Irish during the.
I mean, I'll bite that bullet. I'm glad a theocracy didn't do it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Again,
it's a separate question, though. If the U.S. dropped the bomb on an island, would that suddenly make it more likely that the theocracy or terrorists would be able to get the bomb? I don't really follow that logic.
Yeah. I wanted to counter once again flow trace, which it hurts me because I actually do like flow trace, but you wouldn't know from the way I'm the way I'm grilling him. But anyway, like you said previously that like us, like a few major powers having the nukes help force global peace. Yep. Is that the case? Did that happen?
I think so, yes.
Or is it that we now are in a position where others are too afraid to invade us, and we can simply invade them? Because like in the intervening spaces, do we have global... hold on. I'm almost done, and I want you to hear what you have to say. Do we have global peace? No, war still happened. America surely still invaded. There's still found reasons to invade, but also people were terrorized by being bombed. Now, I will admit, to be very clear, that the calculations here that you were talking about before are very difficult, right? Like I can't ask you to make some sort of exact probability of what these outcomes would be. But the idea that we necessarily force global peace, that I have a problem with.
I think global peace perhaps is the wrong word, but I think that it forces wars to be more contained and not to spiral into great power conflicts, the likes of which we've seen in World War I and World War II. So in that sense, I think it's good. We still have Korean wars, but we haven't had a world war. We haven't had a 30 years war in that time. And I think that is largely because of nuclear weapons, because the great powers know if we get involved, which is necessarily going to turn us into a huge thing, it's going to be game over.
Okay,
I must vociferously disagree with his framing. No, I think wars have become less vociferously. Yes, go for it. I'm always glad to teach you, buddy. Wars have become less destructive since World War II, not because the mechanisms of warfare have improved, but because, well, I guess in a sense it is because we've become more precise with our warfare. But because
There are
we've
multiple
become because of globalism, because we've become more interlinked by trade, by global trade, and the world divided into two different trading blocks that primarily wouldn't benefit from warfare with each other.
That is a contributing reason.
Wait,
but...
hang on. I'm going to answer just
I'm
like you.
hanging.
Okay? I'm going to go 1.5 million miles per an hour. All right.
Good.
The
Then I can
nuclear
get- then I
weapons
can
are a
talk
weapon. The nuclear weapons are a weapon that could bring about the extinction of mankind. Their proliferation is a threat to mankind himself. It is stupid to think that, well, the United States will always be the United States. The United States will always be this good country. If Hitler can happen to Germany, Hitler can happen here. If Pakistan could easily devolve, all right, all of these nations could shift governments in a way that is totalitarian and dangerous. And now you've given madmen nukes. That's a dangerous setup for the world. All you needed was JFK Jr. and Nikita Khrushchev to be a little bit more hot-tempered, and we could have been living in the aftermath of nuclear annihilation following the Cuban Missile Crisis. Nukes did not make us safe. The nukes almost brought the world on the brink of World War III. To quote the Oppenheimer film, World War II might end by nukes, but World War III starts with nukes. It's dangerous. There you go. Did I do that fast enough for you?
$5 from Griffin Shanky. The USA did not lead the emperor in charge. He was made into a figurehead. The surrender condition was to leave him in charge, which is insane.
Here's the thing on the nuke question before I toss it over to you, Chris, because I see he's got his hand up. There is absolutely there's absolutely a risk of all-out nuclear war that does end the human race. But you also cannot simultaneously underestimate the fact that it is a huge deterrent against great power conflicts. Yes, globalism is also a contributing reason. Yes, precision weapons is also a contributing reason. But one of the reasons why, for example, the world developed into two giant trading blocks and not two giant blocks of nations that went to war is because an all-out war would inevitably drag in the United States and Soviet Union. Yes, go ahead.
Great powers will always fight. In the future, there's going to be some warfare between great powers. Again, all nukes have done is up the damage potential of those great wars. It hasn't made us safer.
Hold on.
It's made future warfare is that much more dangerous.
Hold on. It makes potential warfare more dangerous, absolutely. But it absolutely does have an effect to suppress the likelihood of that warfare. Now, if you don't think that trade-off is worth it, I'm totally willing to have the debate. But I think that's where the argument of, like, it's very difficult for us to ever put this genie back in the bottle comes out. And I don't think that's a result of even the United States pursuing the nuclear weapon. I just think this is a fact of how the universe works, of how physics works, and as human beings enhance their ability to understand the physical world, this was always going to develop. So given that nuclear weapons are going to exist, I don't think we'll ever get to a world where it's like some dark technology like AI in Dune. Like, I don't think that's ever going to happen. Then I think the best model is one in which the great powers of the world have nuclear weapons that makes it much less likely that there's any outright direct conflict between them.
Okay. Go ahead.
To answer that super chat person, yeah, the emperor as of now is like greatly reduced and it's just a figurehead, right? But the emperor is still a thing, right? The emperor at the time wasn't executed. His family also wasn't executed or tossed in the streets and stripped of all their titles. No, the family is still there. Now, did the Japanese, the Imperial Japan, did they want more than that to be still invested with more power? Absolutely, but by the time that Russia had invaded Manchuria, and they knew they had no allies on the world stage, and they could not prosecute the war, that they had very little options. When America made it not clear, because we kind of did it in a subtle way, we didn't directly say so, right? We made it clear that the emperor wasn't going to be hanging from a tree branch. Then they were much more willing to end the war, right? Like the emperor was like, all right, cool, this is good enough. We're going to go with the Potsdam Agreement. I'm pronouncing it wrong. Potsdam. I do apologize. I'm pronouncing that wrong.
Okay. Any other thoughts on the emperor thing?
That you're thinking of, but
because again, I think there is a difference between someone who is a figurehead versus someone who has any kind of legislative or imperial power. I would say, right, that allowing Imperial Japan, the emperor, to still have that kind of power, we might be dealing with a much different situation today than we were than we are now. right?
But they was never going to. That was never.
But it's
going
an
to be the case,
unknowable
right?
thing, right? It's an
Oh,
unknowable
no,
thing.
no, it's not. It's not unknowable. Oh, sorry. It's unknowable what would happen if the emperor was in place, right?
Yes,
Like they still had that
Mhm.
power. But it's knowable that the emperor was never going to have that kind of power, one way or the other, right? Either he was going to be completely dethroned, or we left him in place and just like left him as a figurehead. But like he was never going to be able to have that power. That part we know.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you for the gift subs. Thank you for the bits. Okay. Keep them coming. We're hype train is close. If we get one more individual sub, we get a hype train going. So please do that for me. But I wanted to. We are winding down. I know some people have to go. But I have one last question, right? Before this happens. And this is to the panel as a whole. Do you think that let me ask this. Is there a situation today, right now, the world we live in, where you think a nuclear strike would be justified? And what is that situation?
I don't think so. I think
So
I think
under
a nuclear
no
strike,
conditions.
Yeah, I feel like a nuclear strike must always violate the proportionality principle. It's always there designed to maximize collateral damage, so it's always unethical. Like I can't think of an ethical way to use nukes except actually using it on 100% military targets. Like there's just no way. Like it's clearly designed to be a city-destroying bomb. It's going to be dropped on civilians. Like there's just no way you. It's what we can do. We have smaller ordnance that can accomplish our military objectives without needless wanton destruction, and nukes only bring needless wanton destruction and death. So I don't think there's any way you could ever justifiably use it because it's always going to maximize civilian casualties.
So
by
$10,
design.
yeah, $10 from OmniSlap to say this panel's been brought to you by Oppenheimer, the movie. So there you go. $5 for Fondue to say the existence of nukes has a game warping effect on how nations engage in war. Even if they don't stop wars, it does control how they are waged. Yeah, I want the rest of the panel to answer. Like, is there anyone who thinks there's a condition where nukes will be dropped? Anyone?
That they will, or that
That
it
you
be
think it's
justified?
justified, that it's justifiable. Okay, conditions met. Let's game on. Let's go. Right.
I have a very hard time imagining any scenario where it would be.
Okay, fair enough.
Just invent World War II again. Like
I don't know.
If you're in favor of the nukes, just invent World War II again and say that would be the situation.
I don't look forward to reinventing World War II.
So I don't know. I'll.
So people in my chat are saying it's acceptable if nukes are used on us first. Would you disagree there, LSP? Say
Yes, I would.
Russia dropping nukes on us as we speak. You say no, we don't
Okay, yeah.
retaliate at all.
Yeah, because I'd rather
That would be
stand.
proportional.
Yeah, no, that would be disproportionate, right? We're targeting their civilians, right? Like it's not proportionality doesn't mean like that you're doing tit for tat. When they hit you, you hit them. It means that you are using the necessary amount of force to accomplish your military objectives, right? The minimum amount of force, right? Not an overkill, not a city destroying bomb, not like completely wiping out their civilians, right? It's like if let's say like instead of like Germany nuking us, they just totally invaded and enslaved us. Would it be okay for us to just enslave them back if we ever got the upper hand? Like, no, it would still be unethical. It'd still be wrong, right? There's a right side to history to stand here. And even if we are nuked, it is wrong to kill civilians. It's wrong to target civilians. Even if we are, like, we can't respond to terrorism with
What do you
terrorism.
think about
Al
that,
Qaeda flies a
Prime Time?
plane into us. I don't think we should just fly kamikaze them back.
I'm not ready to say that there's like no justification. Like
What if Trump won the White House? Would it be okay then?
Sure, hold on. Stop distracting me with your nonsense, Wick. I think that like I'm imagining, and this is just a hypothetical, but like I'm coming up with hypotheticals here, right? That like if there was a power that was waging war against our homeland, and they were proving themselves to be stronger than us, and they were committed to a total war, right? We're going to wipe the slate clean on the North American continent. And like the only reasonable way we had to stop them was through nuclear weaponry. And I mean, I guess, yeah. I mean, I can't say I'd be protesting against that. So I mean, if you want me a situation, I gave you a situation. So
No, that was perfectly valid. Okay, gang. I want to give everyone a chance. First of all, gang, if you like the content today, there's a like button on that YouTube that you need to hit. And there's a subscribe button right next to it. And you hit that too, okay? If you're watching this on Kick or on Twitch, hit that follow button if you haven't yet. We are still in a hype train, so keep giving me subs, keep giving me bits. Support the channel financially if you want this kind of content to keep coming. Gang, also, if you're on YouTube, thank you for the super chats. Continue to give me super chats. I'll continue to read it out loud. We are going to give all these lovely people an outro, a chance to shout themselves out and tell any closing statements that they may have. But we are going to open this panel up afterwards for a brief time at least. And so I know there's some people waiting who've been wanting to yell. So if you're out there, !Discord, jump in the backstage. We'll pull you in. But first, tomorrow, 6 o'clock, I'm going to be trying a show with Omar, and we're going to be interviewing Chris Speaks. Then at 8 o'clock, moderated by Vosh, I will be debating President Sunday on political violence. Now, I have a team behind me. Professor Meat and Lonerbox are on Team Wick, and Professor President Sunday's bringing Doe and Sirius. I don't know who Sirius is, so that'll be interesting. Check it out, gang. But yeah, let's get to closing statements. We're gonna start with Prime, and we'll just move our way around. Prime, what you got?
Thanks so much. I gotta go because we got a show we're gonna do in just a second. We are going to be talking about, like, is it morally justifiable to run over protesters? And we have someone apparently who's going to defend that idea. So that'll be fun. We have a panel similar to this that we do on my channel. So we'd love for you to come check it out. Starts at 8 p.m. Eastern, just a few moments. Twitch.tv/PrimeKai, PrimeCeys, or YouTube.com/PrimeKai. So we'd love to have you. Thank you, Wick, for being so kind as to invite me here. This is a lot of fun. And I do enjoy everyone here. I don't know if Flo Trace can hear me, but Flo Trace is a great guy. And we used to have on our panel a bunch. And it may look like I despise you, and I might, but I still respect you. So even if you're on the other side of me, thank you guys for having a really good discussion. This is a lot of fun.
Always a pleasure. Gang, check him out, and we'll probably be rating into him after we're done here. But give him a follow, gang. He's great. If you like my content, you'll like his too. Check him out.
And anyone who is coming on after this to say that I'm wrong while you're screaming into the void, you should come on my panel, and then you can tell me how wrong I am. All right, have a good one. Bye.
Bye. You, Chris, what you got?
Yeah, so I don't really do the streaming anymore. My content creation is Substack. Everything was beautiful.substack.com if you want to subscribe to me. I wanted to end with what I think is a very poignant quote from 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙, who was a survivor of the firebombing of Dresden, which we've mentioned a couple of times. And I think, for all the news that the nukes get, firebombings were also quite bad. And I think there's something about bombing in war tends to be very impersonal, and something that Vonnegut did very well is personalize these things. So quick quote, real quick, and then I'll let everybody else talk. So Vonnegut was sort of lamenting the sterile way that the firebombing of Dresden had been reported back on the home front. And so he says, "It's with some regret that I here besmirch the nobility of our airmen, but boys, you killed an appalling lot of women and children. The shelter I have described and innumerable others like it were filled with them. We had to exhume their bodies and carry them to mass funeral pyres in the parks. So I know. The funeral pyre technique was abandoned when it became apparent how great was the toll. There was not enough labor to do it nicely. So a man with a flamethrower was sent down instead, and he cremated them where they lay, burned alive, suffocated, crushed, men, women, and children indiscriminately killed. For all the sublimity of the cause for which we fought, we surely created a Belsen of our own," referring to the Belsen concentration camp. "The method was impersonal, but the result was equally cruel and heartless, and that, I'm afraid, is the sickening truth." And so that, I think, is just sort of exponentialized in the nuking of Japan. I'm trying to imagine what it would be like to survive that. There are people who've recorded their experiences of that, so you can hunt those down. They're equally gruesome and graphic and terrible, and I have trouble justifying them even in hindsight. So that's my
That's my sign off.
Eucharist, thank you for being here. Thank you for your perspective. Having you. Look forward to having you again. Landre, go ahead.
Hard to follow that. That it was not an enjoyable position to sort of be in the almost pro-war part of this, because that is certainly not my general mentality. Wick, I appreciate you inviting me for my first ever Twitch to YouTube debate thing. It was enjoyable. All the people here, including Prime, profoundly intelligent people, enjoyed all of you. And thanks again, Wick, for having me.
Thanks for being here. $5 from Big Dong Daddy Dom.
Yeah.
If we didn't use the bombs, we wouldn't have Godzilla or Gundam. Therefore, I believe they were justified. Fair enough. Kitty Cat. Principles before politics. What's your outro?
So I think the problem with criticizing the decision to drop nuclear weapons at that exact moment in that exact war is a lot of hindsight bias. There's strong evidence that there was no reason to know the exact precise effect it was going to have outside of being a massive bomb. Massive bombs have collateral damage effects. It was a war that included a lot of collateral damage. I'm not defending the gruesomeness of World War II, but we hopefully learn from and build to better rules of engagement, and you don't do that in the middle of the war, you do that afterwards. After World War I, we committed to stopping using chemical weapons during warfare. There's plenty to be said about chemical weapons in that regard, but at the very least, we stopped throwing mustard gas at other soldiers. This is an example where I think the morally gray nature of it is obviously questionable on a number of bases, but it's hard to put this into black and white. And I think that when you're talking about trying to end a war quickly, save as many civilians and as many lives in total as you possibly can, that it was a calculated risk, and that the world has gotten somewhere at least from that. That a nuclear weapon was eventually going to get used by someone, and maybe we were lucky that it happened in 1945 with the smallest, least effective nukes that have ever existed, and not with a much larger, more dangerous weapon somewhere much further down the line when some lunatic did something. It's not a question of if, but when.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Principles Before Politics. Really lovely to see you. Thank you for the gift subs. Thank you for the bits. Keep them coming, gang. You gotta feed me. Feed my need, because it's my birthday week, gang. So if you ever wanted to give me a present this week, the time to do it. Yeah, I'm extended it to a week. Yeah, I could do that. Yeah, it's happening. Okay. Bomb me. Hiroshima me with gift subs, okay? I want the impact to be felt for generations by the level of force and power generated by the donations, gift subs, and bits and super chats given to me. LSP, go ahead.
Yeah, it was a fun talk. I enjoyed it. Normally I don't do this. Normally, like if I had something to shill, it would be like my channel, but my channel isn't even good, so it doesn't even matter.
Good yet.
Yeah, that's a way to look at it. However, I do have something to shill that I'm kind of ashamed to shill. About 4 months ago, I ended up in the hospital. There was my own stupidity that put me there, and I've got thousands of dollars in debt that I just frankly cannot afford. So I started to GoFundMe to ask people to help me pay for my hospital bills, and it's a little
Put that in my chat, please. Put that in my chats. Yeah.
Yes, it's a little rough to have to swallow your pride for something like that, but I did.
I did the same thing 2 days ago, so no shame.
You were in the hospital 2 days ago?
No. I started a GoFundMe for
Oh.
my own treatments.
Oh shit. Well, good for you, man. Yeah, I don't know what to say. Like, I'm trying to get back into the game just so I can like fundraise for my hospital bills, and this is the best I can do. Unfortunately, like I said, I'm a teacher. I earn a teacher salary, and it's summer, and we don't get paid much, and
well,
I can't afford the shit I owe.
Go check it out, and I encourage if you both of you post your GoFundMe's also in my Discord, so it will be more there. It's okay, Eucharist, if you have to dip. Thank you for the subs. Thank you all for the subs and things. Really generous. But show some generosity to LSP and Old Man Laundry as well. If you got $5, as someone who has also used GoFundMe to help and is in the process of using that to help, right? It really helps. So donate to them as well.
People are saying I'm doing the wrong link. Hang on.
Oh, if you're doing the wrong link, I can't help you.
I have to
That's all you. Okay, but in the meantime,
like an idiot.
Okay,
I gotta go on Prime Panel. Bye.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Bye. Flowtrace, go ahead.
What's up, y'all? My name's Flowtrace. Twitch.tv/Flowtrace. Twitter.com/Flowtrace. I'm even on Kick now. Kick.com/Flowtrace. Thank you so much for putting this thing together. Thank you to all the viewers on all the channels that made this possible. You know what? I don't care that I was gonna not give an opinion because I don't want to do without them being here. I felt bad, but I don't give a fuck. When you are evaluating whether or not people are moral monsters or war criminals, you have to look at their intent and what they knew. The Nazis knew that by bombing Jewish districts in Warsaw, they weren't going to help themselves win the war. They weren't doing anything. But the Allies had legitimate questions in their head. You can think they were wrong, that they came to the wrong factual decision, that this would help save lives. But that genuine belief on their behalf is the key between distinguishing well-intentioned people that made mistakes that are reasonable to make in a situation as complex as World War II, with the advent of a new kind of technology we've never seen before, and what we would consider as the true monsters of World War II, and people truly deserving of the term war criminal. Other than that, thank you all, and stay safe. Have a great day.
See you later. Gang, we are not ending it. I know there's some people in the backstage. If you guys want to stay, you may. If you have to go, I understand too. But if you have big opinions on this, and you wanted to share those opinions, how do you do that? Well, let me tell you. Let me walk you through the steps. What you're going to do is you're going to click the Discord link, !Discord in chat. If my mods want to post the Discord link into Kick and to YouTube, please do so. I want you to click that link, accept the rules, then you're going to see a voice chat at the top that says backstage. You jump in there. When we're ready, we'll pull you on, and we'll go for, I don't know, until I'm bored. So, you know what excites me is money. The more money you give, the longer it goes. But anyway, let's start by bringing these people back and see what they got to say. Okay, hello everyone. You're live.
Wick.
Yep, that's my name.
Are you for or against bombing Japan entirely?
Like entirely? I think it was war. We needed to bomb something, right? Like we needed to stop them.
Why not bomb like a tree or something, or like sand?
If I believed that bombing sand would have stopped Imperial Japan, based.
I hate sand.
You know
It's
what?
everywhere.
You know what? I guarantee what we should have done was like dropped an atom bomb like off of every coast of Japan, just off the coast, like about 10 bombs going off simultaneously.
We had 3.
That way we'll be like, look, do you want to face this? We just blew 10 bombs around all of Japan. You really want to deal with this?
Tiberius. Hi.
I'm Wick. I got
okay, Landry, I'll see you later. Bye, buddy.
See you, Landry.
See you guys.
So what do you think of that?
Tiberius, it's been a while since we've had you on. I want Tiberius's take on this. Because he's been
I actually think it would have been immoral to not drop the bomb. So there's your hot take.
Do you want to elaborate, please?
Yeah, so if you are the sovereign of a state, right? If you're the guy who has to make to call the decision, what is your first priority? First priority is the general welfare and well-being of your own citizenry. And in a war, and by the way, just for anyone who needs to know this, I do believe that when you declare war, like we have these ideas about how it's supposed to be like moral and ethical. No, I believe in every principle of total war. The idea that we actually treat it nicely is a fucking ridiculous idea. Let's go on to this part. Consider you're Truman in 1945. It's August, right? And you are looking at the preliminary reports that are coming at you from Operation Downfall, which is 2 subsequent operations over the next year. The estimated casualty report for your own soldiers is 750,000. Estimated civilian casualties is over 3 million. That's not a conversation. That's press the fucking button right goddamn now.
Did all of our anti-nuke people leave?
Yeah, we lost them.
We lost all of our anti-nuke people.
I think they're all on the
Gang, if you are anti-nuke, we need you in here for the conversation, okay?
Yeah.
Otherwise, I will steel man it, and I'll steel man it. So
I think Logo.
I'm anti-nuke.
Yeah, he's anti-nuke.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what is your response to that? Okay, first of all, Omnislap, I'll say it. This panel was brought to you by the movie Oppenheimer in theaters now. Are you happy? Okay, he paid for that, so. Logos, go ahead.
Well, in context to that about war, you know, like you need to protect your citizenry and all that. I understand Pearl Harbor was attacked, but I mean, do we sincerely think that if the war continued, that Japan was going to start sending their freaking people on like the actual America, like the actual state, actually going to bomb us or do anything like that? I mean, seriously?
Are we
I think
asking whether or not they had the capability to, or did they have the want and will to? Because they had the will to invade our country.
Sure.
They just didn't have the capability to do that.
Yeah.
So like
even
the
if they
argument-
had the even if they had the capability.
Okay, so where the argument tends to kind of go from this point is, you know, are we basically kicking puppies, right? Because we have subjugated Japan to the point where they, quote unquote, and this is where I wanted to fight Prime, they couldn't prosecute a war. Well, unfortunately, when it comes to war, you can prosecute a war with sticks and stones. Because every person who's been in any kind of military will tell you that half the equation, if not more, is do you have the fight? Do you actually want to fight? Do you believe in your cause? What have you? I think we saw with Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and then at least from the preliminary reports that we saw from Japanese documents after the war, they were training 13-year-olds to charge the beaches with bamboo sticks as spears. I'm not.
And they were also massively building up the entire southern region, which was the first point of the invasion. Which is part of the reason why Hiroshima and Nagasaki were targeted.
There's a lot of reasons why Hiroshima and Nagasaki were targeted. What I will get into is that with Operation Olympic and Operation Cornet, which were the two subparts of Operation Downfall, we were kind of playing into the hands of what Japan wanted with the invasion of Kyushu. The problem was that when it comes to invading Kyushu, there's only one place you can do it. So it was just one of those deals where we had to do that. I don't know if we should have just gone and skipped to Cornet, but that's a whole other conversation. If I need to like give exclaimers for anybody, please ask.
Okay. Well, let me steelman the other side a bit, right?
Sure.
At the end of the day, right? Would it not have been more moral not to invade at all, but to simply isolate Japan, as Prime said on the panel? Russia, Soviet, the USSR, was invading Manchuria. They were invading these places. We were going to push them back through conventional means in their other holdings, their imperial holdings outside of Japan. Would that not have been more moral than purposefully targeting civilians? Whether there was military there or not, doesn't matter. We purposely knew that many civilians, thousands and thousands of civilians, were going to die by dropping these bombs.
Right.
We knew it.
Yeah. So, like, I really wanted to come hard on that in regards to, like, why is it so much morally different that we're gonna, like, starve people out and make it to where they cannot have an industrialized society, to where we're basically killing them in absentia versus dropping the bomb straight out? Like, yeah, we're
because at any
guaranteeing
point during the starvation, they could stop. They could say, stop. Whereas once the bombs drop, that's it. There's no other choices. There's no other discussion. They're dead immediately.
Right.
The immediacy.
So, I say no to both.
Just real quick. The immediacy matters here, right? And we could argue, and I would agree with you, that starving to death is worse, a worse way to die. But that can be stopped. That can be reversed. That could be intervened in. Whereas a nuclear bomb, that's it.
Right.
Right.
All right. So here's the caveat in the nuance of that conversation. The Soviet invasion happens.
Also, if we have cams, put them on. Anyway, go on.
Soviet invasion happens the same day the second bomb gets dropped, right? And a lot of people didn't know if the Soviets were going to invade at all because they said at Potsdam they would go within 90 days. And they went on the 90th day. So no one knew if they were actually going to show up to the party, right? And I do want to put that caveat in there because you literally have the bombs and the Soviet invasion at the same damn time. So how much is it one or both? And I can't answer that. At least from even the memoirs between Japanese leaders, some of them were super concerned about the bomb because it's like, how many more of these guys or of these do the Allies have? That was a serious concern for some of them. Some said, fuck it, we're going anyway. But those people who were not worried about the bombs were worried about the Russians taking Manchuria because that was their fallback plan. Because if anyone doesn't remember at this point, Japan controls 2/3 of modern China at this point during the war. Like, they were going to hold this out, and literally Allied estimates in August 1st is that the war was going to last 2 more years.
Yeah,
and then all of a sudden it was over.
I want to give
real quick. I got to drop, but thanks for having me, Wick.
Thanks for being here.
And thanks to everybody else. It was great to talk.
Take care.
Peace out, Girl Scout. I wanted to get Feline in here because I know Feline's anti-nuke. So I want him to be able to respond.
Where the fuck have you been?
I've been waiting to make my miraculous return, bro. You know,
it's great to see you.
Shit. It's good to see you too. You know, well, hey there, hello everybody, Feline Father. So yeah, I want to preface this, right? So I am anti the way that they used the nuke, and like where they used it and the reason that they used it. I am pro the building of the nuke at the time, right? Like I wanted to like come in here and like give like the like scientist perspective of like they didn't do anything wrong, right? They did their job, right? They were doing what they were doing, and they were all very horrified afterwards. I do want to say, right, using a perspective of at the time what they knew, you know, and being someone who was in the army for like 6 years and like knowing how war can fucking drag you down. How a drawn out war has all in some you know capacities has more than just like a like loss of life effect on people. You know, dragging out a war like that has a huge effect on people's mental stability. You know, the morale of not only just the soldiers but also the people back at home. And I also want to bring the perspective of, you know, if we're going to sit here and say that there isn't a calculus to be made in regards to, you know, the life of one U.S. soldier compared to the life of a, you know, enemy, whether it be a civilian or soldier, then we're lying to ourselves, right? We hold our soldiers' lives in more specific, you know, higher regard than others. And I understand the position and why they did it, right? I get it. However, I think the argument to be made of using the nuclear, you know, weapon and using it in a non-capacity of killing people, and it's a show of force. I personally think it would have had the same effect. But you know, that is to be, you know, we don't know that because you know, we can't go back in time and make another decision. So yeah.
I think kind of necessarily like dropping it is a show of force. Like if I can kind of redirect to like the concept of like positive and negative reciprocity. Like if you fuck with us, then we're gonna fuck with you. And like, you know, like he, you know, like Hawaii was attacked out of nowhere, and like we, you know, like we paid back bad with bad. And like, you know, like the proportions I think matter less, but because it's more so it's an issue of culture, of just like, you know, like trying to establish your name, because that's how like, you know, like that's how like most of human history has been run, right? Like you're only as good as your name. Whereas, you know, like now we've been evolving into like oh no, everyone has like intrinsic worth and all that, da da da. But like, yeah, like, you know, like 50-60 years ago, like it was a matter of like, hey, like, you know, like you needed to have a respect behind your name, and like, you know, like people needed to know like not to just not fuck with other people like for the sake of not fucking with other people, but more so to just like, you know, like protect yourself and your tribe and your family. But like, you know, like we're hopefully starting to evolve past this a little bit.
I don't have a tribe.
If anything, I would actually say people's soft power and social standing, and not just people, but like of nation states, is far more relevant now than it ever was then.
I think the problem with something like a nuke is just shooting it off onto like the ocean and just saying, yeah, we could do that to your cities. A, like we don't have enough nukes to just be throwing them out there, and B, we need to actually show that we are willing to bomb civilian targets for it to be an active, you know, threat. Because if all we're going to do is harm the wildlife, much like
Why does
North
it have to
Korea
be
does.
civilian targets?
Nobody cares.
You mentioned that unless we were willing to show that we're willing to use this on civilians, then it wouldn't have been effective. Why did it have to be civilian targets? Why couldn't we simply use it on a much more military kind of target, right? Like a base.
The problem is the size of scale of a nuclear weapon. A nuclear weapon is far too large to just lob at like a military base.
Atomic.
Those are like tactical nukes that we would use for that. But because of the fact that you have such a big blast area, there's inevitably going to be civilian casualties no matter where you put it.
Yeah, so like the idea of a tactical nuke makes absolutely no fucking sense then, right? Like I hope we would agree on that.
Hold on. What? So can I like so you said in regards like we had a limited amount of them, right? We only had like 2, right? I would like so I would ask you this, right? So at the time they didn't know we only had 2, right?
Yeah.
For all they had,
we had to weaponize things that we could drop on Japan at the time. We had 3.
Yeah.
Okay, 3, right?
Yeah.
Right. Regardless, but like they didn't know that, right? For all they know, we had like a shit ton of them, right? And I think personally, it would have been a much more kind of like shock and awe, bigger show of force if we used like a singular bomb on like a not necessarily small military target, but like a relatively important military target in like the Pacific or something, right? Just to like really drive home, we could have just said like, look, we're willing to use one of these bombs on a small ass outpost here in the middle of the Pacific, right?
Right. But the problem is that would have taken time to get back to the emperor and to disseminate to the rest of the army.
All right.
The fact that it was like a major city on the home islands immediately goes, okay, shit's gotten really bad. Because if we record that and send it to the Japanese, they're probably being like, this is fake. This is a lie. Like there's no real way to like say this is a lie when you have refugees coming in all across the home islands saying the entire fucking city just got evaporated in 2 seconds.
Can I ask, like, because I generally don't know this, did the like opinion of the Japanese people actually play into like the wanting of the immediate surrender of them, or
no?
No,
I didn't think so.
It
wouldn't have mattered then.
It was a military junta. The problem was that, or not the problem. What basically happened was that basically 6 people were running the country, and I can't remember what the name for that meeting was, but before the nukes got dropped, only one of them was like, hey, we can't win this. Like, how long are we going to bleed this out? And was like, we should just call it quits. The rest of them were like, for the pride of Japan, fuck no. The first bomb goes off, and it looks like it's 3-3 from at least what I've been able to discern. And then you have the Russian second bomb, invasion all at the same, or on the 9th. It was 4-6, or sorry, it was 4-2 at that point. But the issue that basically came down to none of them wanted to take the political hit for it, which is weird because they all could have counted themselves out of a job anyway. If
who
they
didn't want to take a political hit? Who are you talking about?
The leadership of the country at the time, right? The 6 people there were like, hey, if we surrender, I'm out of a job.
And to remind you, gang, even when they were attempting to surrender, there was a uprising in the lower ranks that tried to prevent them from doing it.
Yeah, there was a coup attempt.
There was a coup attempt to. Again, this is after the Russian invasion of Manchuria. This is after the second bomb drop. They actively tried to stop the surrender. There was a portion of the military that was just, we're going to prosecute this war with sticks and stones until our the very last breath. And so this was not a it was a close thing either way, right? It was a close thing either way.
Right.
I mean, honestly, probably justifiably so. Like when 9/11 happened, I'm sure, a lot of people rallied together and were like, fuck whoever did this, no surrender, fuck their terms, we're not negotiating with them.
I don't think that was something that was play here. I mean, because honestly,
that's kind of how we felt. Sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, that was the whole point of what we were doing, right? It wasn't a shocking awe to scare the citizens. It was a shock and awe to scare the Japanese military leaders. it wasn't to like scare the citizens. Regardless of what we did there, the Japanese citizens were afraid of fucking everything anyways, right? Because what was happening to them.
And that's the problem with like something like a
can...
blockade and a starvation is that only really affects the citizens. It doesn't affect, you know, the higher level military generals.
Right.
That they just get to eat comfortably. So the starvation will only affect the poor citizens.
I mean, I feel like it'd be really hard to establish like the mens rea of like pressing the red button. I mean, like I've watched Dr. Strangelove at least like 100 times, so like I kind of get it. But like, you know, like I'm sure like it wasn't just to shock the military. Like I'm sure like they probably considered a little bit that like, you know, the civilians, especially all the ones that died, like were probably going to, you know, like kind of reel and be like, maybe we shouldn't do this.
I honestly, I still push back against the idea that it was somehow to convince those Japanese civilians. I mean,
well,
I don't think so. Personally.
Like, do you understand like the idea why we firebombed Tokyo? Like, what was like the plan with that? Because it wasn't to take out the heavy industry, because that was unaffected by the firebomb.
It was straight up like ЛeMay's idea of total war, right? They are of the idea that you're not just a combatant if you're a soldier. You're a combatant if you're in the factories, if you're a taxpayer, if you are training to be a soldier, you know, and you're 17 and you just, you know, got to the point where you could be recruited. Doesn't matter. You are part of the war effort. Right. You have to die. Or you have to be stopped, at least.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like we shouldn't be at war with people who aren't evil. And
well, that was like the overall strategy, but like the actual way that they were trying to go about it was called dehousing, and which if you dehouse and you make a bunch of the civilians homeless, that puts an additional strain upon the government to like provide them services, which actively makes it harder and harder to conduct a war. Because we had tried in Germany to just bomb the factories and bomb like the military outposts, but they would just put those underground, they would fortify them up, and it became much less effective as the war went on. Sure, like their supply lines were much worse because they had to like transfer over things to underground bunkers that were in secret. But if you would bomb out the housing, you like, you would cause some civilian casualties, but you could mitigate for that.
Would you say it was some sort of like almost underground railroad?
What? Underground railroad?
I'm so lost.
Boo this man.
Was that a joke?
Boo him.
What?
Cabbages.
Okay,
tomatoes.
okay, everyone. Gang. I am hungry.
I'm hungry.
Tired.
I'm hungry. I'm dead.
I have things I need to do, but I love you all. We're going to see you tomorrow. We're going to see you tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern. Me and Omar are going to be having Chris Speaks on. And then at 8 o'clock, that's a big one, gang. That's the show. 8 o'clock, we're going to have on, Vosh is going to moderate, and I will be debating with Team Wick versus Team President Sunday. Tune in for that. Should be a show, a spectacular. So check out. We're rated Prime Kai. So make sure you spam those emotes and let him know that this is his Nagasaki, okay? Because this is going to be the bombing to bomb all bombs. Okay, bombs away.
Oh, you should say your debate with President Sunday is going to be a blowout. Because, like, it's going to be nuked from orbit.
Fair enough.
Racist.
Fair enough. Okay. Hail Hydra. No, none of that here. Yeah, see you guys later. Thank you for the donations. Bye.
Take care. Who's all left?